20 years ago, in the harsh winter of Alaska, two young people vanished during a trip to view the northern lights, disappearing without a trace and leaving their families shattered in despair. Authorities suspected a reclusive man living near the scene, who was present on the route during the same time frame they disappeared, but no bodies were found, and there were too few clues to pursue further. The investigation ultimately reached a dead end. However, throughout those long years, one investigator never gave up, holding firmly to the belief that the truth was still buried somewhere beneath the ice and snow. Then one day, as the ice melted and an old camera was discovered at the bottom of the river, a tiny detail that everyone had previously overlooked emerged. One small detail powerful enough to overturn the entire case and cause a shock in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive deep into this chilling story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love spine-tingling cold cases like this, don't forget to hit subscribe. At the end of December 2006, Cordova was immersed in Alaska's characteristic brutal winter. Temperatures plunged well below -25 degrees Celsius. The sky offered only a few feeble hours of light, the rest being thick, endless darkness and gusts of wind, carrying dry snow that whipped fiercely across the sparsely traveled Copper River Highway. In that setting, Emily Hart, 21, a University of Washington student who had returned home for the holiday, spent most of her time with family after a grueling semester, and Ryan Hale, 22, Emily's ex-boyfriend and longtime close friend, who was working seasonally at the Cordova port, decided to meet up on the evening of December 22nd to drive out and watch the aurora, a phenomenon both had loved observing since high school. Around 8:40 p.m., they appeared at the Fisherman's Store gas station, bought hot drinks, and reviewed their travel plan. The station's old camera recorded images of them leaving the area, getting into Ryan's familiar Jeep Cherokee, and heading out along Copper River Highway, a location a few miles from town, and typically the darkest spot, ideal for skywatching. That night, a snowstorm arrived unexpectedly earlier than forecast, blanketing every trail and severely reducing visibility. No one witnessed their journey after leaving the gas station, and no communication signals were ever sent. By the next morning, a snowplow operator discovered the Jeep Cherokee parked crookedly on the roadside, headlights still on, passenger door slightly ajar, the interior lightly dusted with snow. The worker looked around but saw no sign of Emily or Ryan. The snow that had fallen all night had completely erased any footprints or direction of movement. Once the Jeep was identified as Ryan's, the families immediately tried calling and texting, but neither victim responded. Time slowed in the freezing air as each call went straight to voicemail. After more than an hour with no information, the families had no choice but to conclude the situation was beyond self-resolution. At 11:24 a.m. on December 23rd, unable to wait any longer, the family officially called the Cordova Police Department to report that Emily Hart and Ryan Hale were missing under dangerous conditions. That call was immediately transferred to dispatch, and within seconds, the duty officer classified it as high-risk missing based on three matching factors: unusually prolonged loss of contact, life-threatening extreme weather, and the victim's Jeep being abandoned alone on a remote stretch of road. Within less than 3 minutes, all information was entered into the system, beginning the official investigation phase, and the nearest patrol unit was dispatched directly to the Jeep's location to assess the scene. Upon arrival, officers recorded temperatures still below 20 degrees Celsius, northeast winds at Beaufort Scale 4 lashing across the snow-covered road, and fresh snowfall continuing to bury any faint traces that might have remained from the previous night. Their first action was to establish a protective perimeter using reflective stakes and boundary tape, cordoning off a roughly 50-meter radius around the vehicle to prevent disturbance by civilians or passing vehicles. The surrounding area was completely quiet, with no signs of recent movement except for the snowplow's tire chains from early morning. Officers documented the shape of snow accumulation on the hood, the degree of snow adhesion on the windshield, and snow depth at various points to estimate how long the vehicle had been stationary. They also remeasured the distance from the road edge to the vehicle's position to determine whether the Jeep had been deliberately parked off-center or had slid slightly while stopping. At the same time, they noted the absence of fresh human or animal footprints, only compressed snow rings beneath the new layer, making direct tracking nearly impossible. After the initial scene report was transmitted to command, police determined that if Emily Hart and Ryan Hale were still out in this environment, the threat to life was extremely high. Based on that assessment, a search and rescue deployment order was issued immediately under the town's emergency protocol. The Cordova Volunteer Rescue Squad was mobilized while the patrol unit continued securing the scene, sweeping the immediate perimeter around the Jeep to record additional factors that could directly impact search operations, including uneven deep snow, a slight downslope to the right of the road, and sparse forest beginning about 30 meters from the roadway. About 30 minutes after receiving the order, the Cordova SAR team arrived on scene fully equipped for Alaska winter search conditions, including high-powered lights, handheld GPS, marker stakes, and emergency locator gear. After receiving handover of the scene and a quick briefing from police on terrain, weather, and key points of interest, the SR commander developed the initial search plan, dividing personnel into 3 small teams and assigning search zones within a 1-mile radius of the Jeep Cherokee's position. The zoning focused on 3 main directions along Copper River Highway southward, the sparse forest edge to the east, and the route down to the Iac River shoreline to the southwest. These 3 directions were prioritized because they represented the natural paths people leaving the vehicle might take in darkness, especially with the previous night's visibility severely limited by the blizzard. The first team moved along the roadway, checking each segment of sunken snow, vehicle tracks, and gaps in the snow cover that might indicate human or vehicle presence between the night of the 22nd and morning of the 23rd. They found no intact footprints. Every surface had been blanketed by fresh overnight snow. Nevertheless, they used marker stakes to circle areas of unusual snow compression for potential later examination beneath the new layer. The second team advanced into the forest edge, where tree density was not thick but sufficient to block light and reduce visibility. They moved in single-file formation, spaced about 2 meters apart, to avoid missing areas between team members. Based on snow depth in that area, the team concluded that any passage the previous night would have been completely leveled by fresh snow since dawn, making visual direction tracking nearly impossible. They checked every tree base, depression, and low brush section for broken branches, dropped objects, or disturbed snow, but results remained empty. The third team headed down toward the Iac River shore, where the terrain sloped gently with many slippery bank sections. They inspected the water's edge for cracked or slid ice, but the entire river surface was uniformly frozen, covered with smooth snow showing no unusual depressions. The team also swept flashlights through shoreline bushes and probed with poles to check snow depth, but found no foreign objects. When all 3 teams returned to the temporary rally point, the SR commander requested cross-referencing of each member's GPS data to create a Level 1 search map. This map recorded the entire 1-mile radius checked, including search paths, snow compression markers, points of direction change, and actual movement times. The mapping ensured no gaps were overlooked and aided reorganization if rechecking became necessary. From the initial compiled results, SAR and police agreed that no footprints or clear movement direction of Emily and Ryan appeared within a 1-mile radius of the Jeep. Although the blizzard could erase traces, the complete disappearance without even a single loose item was considered highly unusual, making the situation more complex than initially anticipated. After nearly 2 hours of sweeping, the Level 1 scene map was completed, fully documenting checked areas along with questionable points for potential re-examination. As the map was filed into the scene report and SAR prepared to expand the search radius, the investigative team simultaneously shifted to the next task, reconstructing the complete timeline and last known locations of Emily and Ryan before they drove onto Copper River Highway. The first step in this review was the Fisherman's Store gas station, the last location where security cameras captured their images around 8:40 p.m. the previous night. 2 investigators arrived at the store and requested extraction of all camera data from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on December 22 to aid timeline reconstruction. The store's camera system consisted of only one analog unit mounted near the entrance, with low image quality and frequent noise during heavy snow, but still sufficient to confirm entry-exit times. The store employee cooperated, providing the video recording and credit card transaction logs corresponding to Emily's payment for 2 hot drinks. Based on transaction data, payment was confirmed at exactly 8:38 p.m., matching camera footage showing Emily holding a cup as she walked out the door, with Ryan following immediately behind. Investigators requested additional sales logs to verify whether any other customers appeared around that time, to determine if the victims had interacted with or been followed by a stranger at the store. 2 other customers appeared in the footage, but had no direct connection. Their departure times did not overlap with Emily and Ryan's exit. After copying the entire video segment, the investigative team reviewed each frame to assess activity in the parking area. Although the image was blurry due to snow noise, the video clearly showed the Jeep Cherokee leaving the lot northward right after the couple entered the vehicle. However, one detail caught attention: a figure standing near the left side of the parking area for about 7 seconds, partially obscured by the store's high-pressure light. This figure did not approach the vehicle and left the frame before the Jeep moved, leaving investigators unable to determine whether this was an ordinary customer or a significant clue requiring further analysis. Concurrently with video review, the team cross-checked timing between the camera and the store's payment system to ensure accuracy. Since the camera clock was off by approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds, all timestamps were adjusted according to credit card transaction data to create a standardized timeline. From this, investigators constructed a detailed timeline from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on December 22, 2010. Emily and Ryan en route to the store, 2038, payment for drinks, 2039, 2040, they exit the store and enter the vehicle, 2040, 1 Jeep, leaves the lot, 2045, 21 o'clock, estimated travel time to the area a few miles from town where the vehicle was found the next morning. Re-establishing the timeline narrowed the disappearance window to approximately 2045 to 21 o'clock, and ruled out any incident occurring before they left Fisherman's store. Investigators noted this time frame aligned with family information that Emily habitually texted upon safe arrival or when encountering trouble, yet no communication was sent after the Jeep departed the store. Once the timeline was fully established, investigators concluded that the events leading to the disappearance most likely occurred within a very short period after the vehicle entered the remote section of Copper River Highway. All conclusions were incorporated into the comprehensive report for cross-referencing with scene data. Immediately afterward, the investigative team returned to the Jeep Cherokee's location to proceed with the next step in sequence, unlocking the vehicle and examining the interior to collect evidence inside. The vehicle remained within the secured perimeter, with the thin new snow layer controlled to avoid obscuring details. After confirming no disturbance since cordoning, the responsible officer used standard equipment to open the driver's door, minimizing contact with surfaces likely to retain fingerprints and trace evidence. When the door opened, the cold interior air rushed out, revealing a dark, disordered cabin whose condition, whether from snow entry or prior victim movement, was unclear. Investigators began with overall observation, touching nothing until all object positions were fully documented. On the front cup holders, 2 completely cooled drinks remained in place, Emily's cup only partially consumed, the other fuller. Under the passenger seat, Emily's DSLR camera had fallen and lay tilted to one side, its strap twisted as if it struck the seat edge during hurried movement or when the passenger door was opened. A folded compact tripod rested on the back seat, tripod head facing forward, as though placed down carelessly. A pair of wool gloves was found wedged between the driver's seat and center console, apparently Ryan's. Additionally, a folded paper map sat in the glove compartment in front of the passenger seat, showing no signs of being unfolded. After recording each item's position, The forensic team photographed from multiple angles to ensure all evidence remained documented in its original state. Next came evidence collection. The camera was removed first, carefully placed in an anti-static bag. Technicians recorded its serial number, external condition, and recovery location. The tripod was also seized, deemed potential evidence despite no visible damage. The 2 drink cups were packaged separately and sealed, as they might contain additional DNA or fingerprints. Remaining items, including the gloves and paper map, were collected according to protocol and divided into 2 groups. Those capable of yielding fingerprints and those primarily serving as time habit reference. After collecting portable evidence, fingerprint lifting from surfaces was mandatory. Magnetic powder was applied to the steering wheel, gear shift, inside driver's door, door handles, center console, and passenger side plastic trim. Many prints appeared, most likely belonging to the victims themselves. Nevertheless, technicians lifted all visible prints using tape and placed them on individually coded cards. Special attention was given to the passenger door handle and inner door edge because the passenger door was found slightly open. Any foreign prints there would carry high value. The passenger door handle showed 2 overlapping prints, one partially blurred by damp snow, but still sufficiently clear for collection. The entire process was logged in the scene report with times, personnel, and detailed descriptions of each location. After fingerprint collection and lifting were complete, investigators rechecked the cabin to ensure no small evidence, such as fibers, fallen hair, or foreign objects, was missed. Some snow fragments adhering to seat upholstery were vacuumed into sample tubes for later composition analysis, though the chance of significant information was low due to continuous fresh snowfall. Once all evidence was collected, packaged, and sealed per Alaska State Troopers regulations, it was assigned chain of custody numbers and transferred to the analysis center. After completing the interior examination, the investigative team compiled a summary report for the Jeep Cherokee interior evidence collection phase, detailing items found in original positions, surfaces processed for fingerprints, and the overall cabin condition at the time of unlocking. Although no specific conclusion about the cause of Emily and Ryan's disappearance could yet be drawn, the collected data was identified as a critical foundation for future cross-referencing with scene findings and related statements. After all interior evidence was secured, and the cabin closed and sealed according to procedure, the investigative team moved to the next step in the scene processing sequence. Right after that, attention shifted to the exterior of the Jeep, where investigators began assessing the outside for any signs of contact, collision, or the presence of another vehicle, factors that could help clarify what had happened to the car and the 2 victims in the short period before they went missing. The exterior sweep started at the front of the vehicle, where a thin, even layer of snow covered the surface, showing no unusual drag marks or voids, suggesting someone had stood very close recently. Investigators used specialized soft brushes to gently sweep the snow off the hood, roof, and windshield to check for areas that might retain impressions if someone had leaned against or touched the vehicle the previous night. The surfaces were uniformly smooth, with no distinct indentations, largely because continuous snowfall since dawn had smoothed everything over. As they moved to the sides of the vehicle, the team paid particular attention to the lower door edges and the right front wheel area, where the snow showed a slight difference in thickness, suggesting some impact prior to that morning's snowfall. However, this was only an initial observation and not yet conclusive. The most significant finding was at the rear of the Jeep, where the snow had been compacted into a long track about 1.5 meters wide, running parallel to the edge of the road. Investigators immediately switched to measuring tapes, marked the compacted snow locations, and began removing the fresh surface snow to expose the older layer beneath. Once the top layer was cleared, a tire track with a depth variation of about 2 to 3 centimeters became much more clearly visible. The tread pattern of this track featured large, widely spaced blocks arranged in a shallow V-shaped motif, completely different from the smaller, denser tread of the Jeep Cherokee's tires, which are designed for off-road characteristics. To avoid confusion caused by snow obscuring details, the forensic technicians measured the spacing between tread grooves, the overall width of the track, and the angle of contact with the snow base. The measurements indicated the track width was approximately 2 inches wider than the Jeep's tires, suggesting a wider-bodied, heavier vehicle. Based on the overall shape of the tread pattern, investigators determined it belonged to a common all-terrain tire type often found on older SUVs, but the groove motif pointed toward an aftermarket replacement tire, typically seen on SUVs used for forest or rocky terrain travel. A tire track specialist was called to the scene for a rapid evaluation and preliminary opinion. After examining the track surface, the specialist concluded that this tread pattern matched those commonly used on 1992, 1995 Ford Broncos and some older GMC models from the same era, but the likelihood leaned heavily toward a Ford Bronco due to better correspondence in tire width and groove spacing. This assessment was recorded in the log as tread pattern consistent with 1992-95 Ford Bronco Group requires further verification. Combining this with Level 1 scene mapping data, the team determined that the tire track extended northward along the Copper River Highway axis before disappearing under thicker fresh snow. The presence of this second tire track, especially during the time frame of the couple's disappearance, caused investigators to designate the location as a priority lead, as it was the only element in the surrounding area indicating another vehicle had approached or departed from the victim's vehicle location during the critical time window. Investigators continued expanding the snow sweep several meters around the area to check for any change in direction or sudden braking, but everything was covered by the new snowfall, leaving only the initial tread segment clear enough for measurement and analysis. Several close-up photographs were taken with the forensic team's high-resolution camera for later comparison with tire tread data stored in the state's manufacturer database. At the scene, investigators also noted a slight difference in depth between the left and right tracks of the unknown vehicle, suggesting it may have stopped or slowed when approaching the Jeep. This was considered an additional factor for analyzing the driver's behavior at the time. After completing measurements and photography, the team drove stakes to mark the entire edge of the track and recorded GPS coordinates for each position to support future movement reconstruction. The exterior analysis concluded with a preliminary finding that besides the victim's Jeep Cherokee, at least one other vehicle had been present during the time Emily and Ryan went missing, and the tread pattern strongly suggested a vehicle from the 1992-1995 Ford Bronco Group. This assessment, along with all measurements and scene photographs, was incorporated into the technical report and became one of the first key leads to redirect the investigation. Once the presence of a second vehicle was confirmed, SAR forces were instructed to adjust the search plan and expand the radius to 5 miles to evaluate the possibility that the victims had left the vehicle area or been taken in another direction. With snowfall growing heavier and natural trails completely obscured, the SR team deployed 2 snowmobiles to break trail and quickly survey potential transit routes that one or both victims might have taken on the night of the 22nd. From the Jeep's location, the SR commander established a grid search map consisting of equally sized squares, each assigned to an independent tracking team. The teams advanced in line formation, ensuring full coverage despite sudden terrain changes. The fresh snow had erased nearly all older traces, forcing SR to rely more heavily on terrain features, depressions, frozen water channels, animal trails, and natural low spots that might preserve movement signs beneath soft snow. The first team headed north, toward a long trail leading into deeper forest. They advanced in short segments, using probe poles to check snow stability and powerful lights to scan fallen trees for signs of impact or broken branches from human passage. However, all observed points bore only weather-related characteristics and showed no human presence. The second team moved northwest, where the terrain sloped down into a low valley near a tributary of the Iac River. This was a high-risk area because anyone falling down the slope could be hidden from view, even if Saris passed nearby. As the snowmobiles approached the valley, The team fanned out in line, but found only small animal trails, mostly fox and snowshoe hare. A few softer snow-based locations were marked with stakes for later review, but none were clear enough to confirm human footprints. The third team headed southwest, where the terrain was less steep but featured many low bushes and some open stretches that could serve as resting points during the night. While checking this area, they discovered a single glove lying off to the side of a small bush cluster. The glove was made of gray synthetic fabric, covered by a fresh layer of snow, but still retaining its original shape. Sarah immediately collected the glove into a temporary evidence bag and marked the location with GPS for inclusion in the search report. Team members quickly swept the surrounding 3-meter radius, hoping to find related items, but the snow surface was completely flat with no signs of disturbance, suggesting the glove may have been dropped before the blizzard arrived or lost in passing without direct connection. Although its relevance could not yet be determined, the item was added to the list of recovered objects for later cross-checking. When the three teams regrouped at the planned rendezvous point, the SAR commander requested a comparison of the grid map with the completed routes to confirm no squares had been missed. In total, more than 12 trails, 3 low valleys, and numerous sparse forest areas had been thoroughly checked. GPS data from each SAR member was uploaded to create a Level 2 search map, including the glove discovery location, soft snow base markers, and areas with special terrain features. The final compiled result showed that, apart from the single glove, no other physical evidence appeared within the 5-mile radius. This made the case even more puzzling. Despite a significantly expanded search area, there were still no footprints, drag marks, or discarded items to indicate Emily and Ryan's direction of movement. The complete absence of physical signs further heightened the unusual nature of the disappearance, forcing the investigative team to reevaluate all existing leads. Once the Phase 2 search report was finalized, SAR handed over all data to the investigative team for integration into the case file, officially confirming that the 5-mile area around the scene had been comprehensively searched, but yielded no new leads. With the expanded search producing no additional information, the investigative team immediately refocused on the most significant remaining clue at the scene. The second tire track behind the Jeep Cherokee. This was the only data indicating the presence of another vehicle at the time Emily and Ryan vanished, and identifying the owner of this vehicle became the next investigative step. The technical team promptly sent the tread pattern specifications, tire dimensions, and track width to the Alaska DMV data center for cross-referencing with matching vehicle types. Initial analysis continued to show strong correspondence with tire types commonly used on 1992, 1995 Ford Broncos. Since older models like the Bronco remain relatively common in rural Alaska, DMV responded quickly and provided a list of all registered Bronco owners within Cordova and surrounding areas. A total of 28 legally registered Broncos were identified within an approximate 25-mile radius of Cordova, including both frequently operated vehicles and those registered but rarely driven. The investigative team prioritized the list based on proximity to the disappearance site, frequency of vehicle use, and owner residence information. They then divided personnel into 3 groups to verify alibis for each case on the list. The first group worked directly with DMV and repair shops to review tire replacement records, undercarriage repairs, or any information suggesting which Broncos might use tires matching the scene's tread pattern. Results showed about half of the 28 vehicles used completely different tire types, inconsistent with the recovered pattern. These were eliminated in the first round of checks. The second group conducted phone calls or in-person visits to owners' residences to inspect the actual vehicles, compare tread patterns with scene photographs, and inquire in detail about their travel schedules between 7 p.m. and midnight on December 22. Most owners cooperated fully. Many were able to prove their vehicles had remained parked in garages or had not left home that night. Several provided solid evidence, such as receipts, home security footage, or family witness statements. During this process, 17 owners were eliminated due to clear alibis and mismatched treads. The third group focused on owners noted as having driven on the night of December 22nd or living close to the disappearance location. They verified each person's alibi by checking schedules, interviewing witnesses, and cross-referencing with any recorded activity in town at the time. Among these, some Broncos were reported in use that night, but not on the Copper River Highway route. Another belonged to a night hunter, but additional GPS tracking data from a device installed on the vehicle proved the owner had traveled south, completely opposite direction. Ultimately, after 2 days of continuous review, 25 Bronco owners were cleared from suspicion thanks to solid alibis or physical evidence proving their vehicle tires did not match the scene track. The 3 remaining uncleared cases were one owner absent due to out-of-town work and unreachable at the time of checking, one owner claiming vehicle breakdown on the night of the 22nd, but providing no documentation or witnesses, and the third being Caleb Monroe, owner of a dark green 1993 Ford Bronco, living alone in a cabin on the eastern forest edge of Cordova, about 4 miles as the crow flies from the victim's Jeep location. Caleb was added to the watch list not only because his vehicle and tread pattern matched, but also due to his particularly convenient geographic location. His cabin sat near a seldom-used small road that fed into Copper River Highway, allowing easy access to the victim's area without much chance of detection. When investigators checked Caleb's DMV records, they noted his Bronco had received new tires about 8 months earlier at a small local garage, though the garage kept no records of the old tire type or replacement date. Additionally, Caleb's employment history showed seasonal, irregular work, with him typically staying home during the late-year months, making it harder to trace his movements on the night of December 22nd compared to other owners. With the 3 remaining suspects, the investigative team conducted deeper file reviews, requesting additional confirmation from neighbors, business owners, or any signs of activity that could be documented. During this process, the first suspect was cleared after contact was made, and he confirmed he had been working in Anchorage at the time of the disappearance. The second suspect was cleared when his vehicle was found still sitting in a repair shop garage on the evening of December 22nd, backed by matching receipts. Thus, only Caleb Monroe remained, the one person without a clear alibi, living near the disappearance site and owning the Bronco that best matched the recovered tire track. Although there was still insufficient basis for a conclusion or coercive measures, the investigative team unanimously agreed to place Caleb Monroe under priority surveillance, marking his file as potential suspect and recording the need for direct inspection of both his Bronco and residence at the earliest possible time. Caleb became the sole remaining piece in the list of Bronco owners that could not be eliminated, making direct contact the necessary next step to assess his degree of involvement in the disappearance. From that assessment, the investigative team decided to proceed with the next step according to procedure: proceed to the cabin where Caleb resides, inspect the condition of the Bronco, and conduct an initial interview to determine whether his statements were consistent with the scene evidence. Caleb's cabin was located more than a mile deeper off the main road, connected by a narrow trail flanked on both sides by dense characteristic fir and spruce trees of the eastern Cordova forest area. Upon arrival, the team parked their vehicle at a sufficient distance to observe from afar without initially drawing attention. The cabin had a simple structure, a snow-covered sloped roof, and a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, indicating the occupant was either inside or had left not long ago. Right next to the cabin was a dark green Ford Bronco, parked in line with the entrance, with a thin layer of snow accumulated on the roof and hood. This suggested the vehicle had not been driven for several days, or the owner had only perfunctorily cleared the snow. The investigative team noted the vehicle's exterior condition, focusing on key areas such as the tires, undercarriage, and rear mudflap region. Although snow covered most of the surface, some tread grooves were still visible enough to observe the large blocky tread pattern, which appeared consistent with the tread description in the crime scene report. However, the vehicle's prolonged immobility made precise visual matching difficult. After documenting the necessary photographs, the team decided to approach the cabin, knock on the door, and identify themselves. Caleb opened the door after a few seconds, appearing calm and unsurprised by the police presence. He was wearing a thick jacket, work pants, and wool gloves, attire typical of someone accustomed to harsh living conditions. When asked about contact, Caleb was cooperative and agreed to allow the team inside the cabin to talk. The interior of the cabin was minimally tidy, heated by a wood-burning stove, containing a small wooden table, a tool shelf, and a few basic household items. There were no major signs of unusual activity, but investigators still observed the overall layout to assess the occupants' baseline behavior. The initial interview followed standard procedure, beginning with questions about Caleb's whereabouts on the night of December 22nd. He stated that he had stayed home all evening due to bad weather, only going outside briefly at the start of the night to split firewood, then remaining inside the cabin until bedtime. When asked about the Bronco, Caleb said the vehicle had not been driven since roughly mid-December due to ignition system problems, and he was waiting for parts to repair it. This could explain the thick snow cover and the vehicle's stationary position for an extended period. The investigative team requested to inspect the driver's compartment for comparison. Caleb agreed and led them outside. Upon opening the door, the Bronco's interior indeed showed signs of infrequent use, a thin layer of dust on the dashboard, dust on the driver's seat, and no recent items present. However, because the vehicle had not been driven for many days, no clear signs of recent activity or fresh traces were evident enough to draw conclusions. Investigators also asked whether anyone else could have used his vehicle. Caleb answered firmly in the negative. All of his responses were steady and consistent, showing no particular signs of evasion or unusual tension. His body language remained stable, and his voice stayed firm and unwavering when questioned about whether he had ever passed through the Copper River Highway area that night. Caleb maintained that he had not left the cabin. The team shifted to questions about whether he knew Emily or Ryan. Caleb replied that he was not acquainted with either person and did not recall ever seeing them in town. There were no items inside the cabin related to the victims, nor were there any notable elements inside or around the Bronco that would prompt the team to escalate suspicion. After completing the first round of questioning, the investigative team assessed that Caleb's statements, although not corroborated by witnesses or objective evidence, were superficially consistent. Living alone, bad weather, infrequent departures from the cabin, and a broken Bronco were all common explanations in the area. Therefore, there was no basis at that time for further coercive measures or deeper investigative action against him. Nevertheless, Caleb was not completely ruled out, and his file was flagged by investigators as temporarily low priority. At the conclusion of the visit, the investigative team left the cabin, documenting field notes, photographs of the Bronco, and observations of Caleb's living conditions, then incorporated them into the report with the preliminary conclusion: the first interview did not yield direct incriminating evidence or show clear inconsistencies. After the initial approach and interview at Caleb Monroe's cabin, the investigative team returned their focus to previously collected evidence, among which the memory card from Emily's DSLR camera was considered one of the most potentially valuable sources of visual clues regarding the events leading up to the disappearance. Immediately after recovery, the card was properly sealed and sent to the Alaska State Troopers Lab for data recovery. There, forensic technicians used specialized data reading tools to scan the entire card in recovery mode, searching for deleted or corrupted files. Due to harsh weather conditions and the camera being dropped onto the vehicle floor, which affected the card reader, some files suffered minor damage, but the majority remained readable. After successfully extracting all data, technicians organized the files in their original chronological order based on intact metadata. More than 30 photographs were recovered, mostly aurora images or landscapes taken from inside the vehicle and around the gas station parking area. The photos were divided into two groups, those taken in sufficient daylight and those taken at night. The night photos, potentially containing information related to the time of disappearance, were prioritized for analysis. However, due to low light and the lack of a flash attachment on Emily's camera, many images were heavily noisy or captured only indistinct dark areas. The lab applied basic image processing software to increase brightness, reduce noise, and attempt to sharpen object outlines, but the technological limitations of 2006 meant improvements were limited. Nevertheless, some images still provided useful information. In many frames, Emily had attempted to photograph the aurora through the Jeep's window, and reflections from the cabin interior sometimes created vague human-like shadows or shapes behind. These details were ruled out as suspicious after being identified as belonging to Emily or Ryan. Only the final photograph, taken at approximately 8:44 p.m. very close to the time the two left the gas station, stood out as particularly noteworthy. Though still blurry and noisy, the lower left corner of the frame showed the silhouette of a person standing no more than a few meters from the Jeep. The figure's posture indicated it was standing still, not facing the camera, and was elongated into a faint silhouette by light coming from the store behind. All attempts to increase contrast and clarify the head or shoulders failed to produce a defined shape, showing only a vague outline without specific identifying features. Technicians attempted to enlarge the figure's area, but the original image quality was insufficient to extract details such as facial features, clothing, or objects in hand. The lab also analyzed the metadata of the final photo to confirm the capture time, noting it was recorded just minutes after the gas station card transaction, consistent with the timeline already established by investigators. The presence of the figure in the final image was noted by the investigative team as a potential element, but there was no basis to determine whether it was a stranger, a store employee, a random customer, or merely a distorted reflection of someone passing by the vehicle. In the lab's final report, the result was evaluated as follows. The final image captures an unidentified human silhouette. The image data is insufficient to identify or determine gender, height, clothing, or any individual-level identifying characteristics. This conclusion meant the lab could neither provide a specific identification nor rule out the possibility that the figure was connected to the disappearance. After compiling and evaluating all filtered and assessed photographs, the investigative team noted that while the image data was not groundbreaking, it still had to be added to the case file as a potential piece that could support analysis of the events surrounding Emily and Ryan's disappearance. Based on the data recovered from Emily's camera memory card and previous scene search results, the investigative team and SAR team determined that if Emily and Ryan had left the Jeep in poor visibility conditions, they were most likely to have inadvertently strayed into the Chugach mountain range, an area with complex terrain, constantly changing slopes, and numerous deep crevasses hidden under snow. To optimize the search area, the SAR coordination team used topographic maps to designate 3 new priority zones: the eastern slope with 25 40-degree inclines, the southern depression containing small frozen streams, and a series of old hunting trails running northeast, rarely used in winter. Due to the high danger level in each area, SAR deployed their most experienced personnel and used climbing gear and safety ropes instead of free movement, as in the previous 2 phases. When dividing teams, the SAR commander specifically noted that snow cavities beneath the Chugach foothills could conceal traces or distort surface terrain, making visual assessment difficult. Team 1 was assigned to survey the eastern slope area, which featured multiple consecutive steep inclines interspersed with low trees and rocks. They were equipped with crampon boots, safety lines, and probing tools to check snow stability before each step. Snow depth here ranged from 40 to 60 centimeters, with many wind-packed sections forming sastrugi that made spotting disturbances harder. The team advanced in single file, maintaining safe spacing to avoid simultaneous snow collapse. Along the survey route, they looked for broken branches, slide marks, or unusual depressions, features often left by people falling or tumbling downslope. But all observed features were consistent with natural blizzard effects, with nothing suggesting human passage. Team 2 approached the southern depression, where the terrain was flatter but contained numerous small crevasses and deep pockets covered by uniform snow layers. They used probing poles to test the surface, noting many areas of soft snow and voids caused by underlying streams, but found no signs of collapse or broken edges, indicating heavy weight impact. Some areas were flagged for rechecking later, but no foreign objects, clothing, or other signs related to the missing persons were found. Team 3 moved into the old trails, where trees were sparse and strong easterly winds created very smooth snow surfaces. In such conditions, footprints made before snowfall would be completely erased, though slight deformations in lower snow layers, such as compressed base snow or uneven surface texture, could potentially remain. SAR moved slowly meter by meter, using snow compaction detectors to look for anomalies, but the entire area showed uniform characteristics of fresh snow, indicating no activity had occurred before or during the storm. Team members also inspected large tree trunks for impact marks, but all were intact. After many hours of searching, they expanded into adjacent dense forest areas, continuing to check trail intersections, but still found no useful indicators. When compiling data from all three teams, SAR produced a Level 3 search map clearly marking every route covered, slope degrees, snow depths, and high-risk zones. The map showed that nearly the entire accessible portion of the Chugach forest within range of the Jeep location had been thoroughly searched without evidence of human presence. This led the SAR commander to conclude that if Emily and Ryan had entered this area, their bodies or belongings must lie in terrain too dangerous or too remote to be reached by standard winter search methods. After nearly 3 consecutive days of difficult field operations, the winter search campaign was assessed as having no further potential for new data, and the decision was made to temporarily conclude the winter search phase. The investigative team accepted SAR's final report, noting that the entire primary focus area within the Chugach forest had been checked without recovering any bodies or traces related to Emily and Ryan. After the winter search campaign in the Chugach forest ended without any direct evidence related to Emily and Ryan, the investigative team proceeded to synthesize all data collected since the beginning of the case. The abandoned Jeep's location, evidence inside the vehicle, the unusual tire tracks behind the Jeep, recovered DSLR camera image data, 5-mile radius search results, SR grid search reports, and information regarding Bronco vehicles in the area. The goal of this synthesis was to construct a comprehensive model of possible events on the night of December 22nd, thereby forming preliminary investigative hypotheses. The investigative team assembled an analysis group, reconstructing timelines, scene diagrams, terrain features, and environmental conditions to identify the most logical directions. 3 main hypotheses were proposed, each representing a category of possibilities that could explain why both individuals left the vehicle in harsh conditions and then vanished without trace. The first hypothesis was an accident involving a fall into a crevasse, a scenario that had occurred in multiple previous disappearances in the Chugach Mountains. Under this hypothesis, Emily and Ryan may have exited the vehicle to view the aurora or attempt to find their way when visibility was obscured by snow, then inadvertently strayed into a dangerously steep area. Given the many deep snow-covered crevasses in the Chugach Range, if both fell into a narrow or deep crevasse, they could easily have been buried under fresh snowfall that night. This would explain why SAR found no footprints or dropped items, as a simultaneous fall could have prevented any calls for help. However, this hypothesis had limitations. Team 3 of SAR had searched all high-risk zones, including common accident sites, without finding signs of snow collapse, crevasse edge fractures, or any surface deformation indicating a fall. Moreover, both victims disappearing completely without any items left behind is extremely rare in typical mountaineering accidents. The second hypothesis was that the victims voluntarily left the vehicle and became lost in the blizzard. In this scenario, Emily and Ryan may have actively exited the Jeep for some reason, such as checking a noise, attempting to reorient themselves after losing direction, or seeking a safer location as weather suddenly deteriorated. In conditions of poor visibility and rapidly dropping temperatures, they could have been drawn in the wrong direction, wandered too far to return to the vehicle, and succumbed to exhaustion during the night. This aligns with documented Alaska disappearance cases where blizzard victims often become disoriented within minutes. However, the inconsistency lies in the fact that Sayre searched a 5-mile radius around the area, a very large distance relative to possible movement in freezing darkness, yet found no bodies, clothing, footprints, torn fabric, or any survival indicators. Additionally, both individuals leaving the vehicle without taking minimal gear is difficult to reconcile with the local experience level of Emily and Ryan. The third hypothesis, and the one that required the most serious consideration by the investigative team, was third-party intervention. This hypothesis was supported by the second set of tire tracks found behind the Jeep, consistent with 1992-1995 Bronco models, along with the appearance of a human figure in the final photograph taken at the gas station. The timeline also supported this possibility. The disappearance occurred within approximately 15 minutes after leaving the gas station, in a remote, unlit area suitable for another vehicle to approach undetected. The absence of footprints or dropped items was also consistent with being forced into another vehicle. However, this hypothesis also had gaps: no drag marks, no foreign objects inside the Jeep cabin, and no witnesses reporting seeing a Bronco moving in the area during the blizzard night. Furthermore, when investigators approached Caleb Monroe, the only potential suspect without a clear alibi, no evidence or traces inside his cabin or on his Bronco could be directly linked to Emily or Ryan. Although the tread pattern matched, no incriminating elements were present. When all three hypotheses were considered side by side, the analysis group concluded that none carried sufficient weight to represent a breakthrough. Natural accident left no trace. Voluntary departure was incompatible with SAR data, and third-party intervention had only weak indicators without supporting evidence. This impasse led the investigative team to include in the report the assessment that current data was insufficient to determine a specific direction for the case, and the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale remained in a state where further progress was not possible pending new information or evidence. When the comprehensive analysis of all collected data led to the conclusion that no hypothesis had sufficient grounds to justify further field expansion, the Cordova Police Department was required to take the final step according to procedure for unsolved missing persons cases: prepare the report concluding the active investigation phase. This report synthesized all activities from late 2006 to early 2007, including scene information, physical evidence, image data, SAR search results, verified Bronco owners list, Caleb Monroe interview transcripts, and overall evaluation of the three main hypotheses developed. Upon completion, the report was reviewed by the unit commander to ensure no critical details were omitted and that all search and investigative activities were accurately documented to legal standards. Once validated, the entire case file, including scene reports, sealed evidence, photographs, analysis results, search maps, and related statements, was prepared for official transfer to the Alaska State Troopers, the agency responsible for long-term handling of unresolved cases. The transfer process included compiling an evidence inventory, resealing all containers under a new chain of custody code, and handing over both original and copied files to the Troopers Records Division. The transfer date was clearly recorded in Cordova PD's internal documentation to ensure file continuity. Upon receipt by Alaska State Troopers, the specialized unit conducted a standard intake review, verifying that the case met all criteria for classification as inactive due to lack of new leads. After confirming data completeness, the troopers officially designated the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale as a cold case. This designation means the case will not undergo active investigation, but will be reviewed only upon emergence of new information, new analytical technology, or additional data from any source. From this point, the file was placed in the Alaska State Archive of Unsolved Missing Persons Cases, concluding the initial phase of a case that would remain unresolved for many years. Since the missing persons case file of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale was accepted by the Alaska State Troopers and labeled as a cold case in early 2007, the unit responsible for cold cases has maintained periodic review procedures in accordance with the standards of that time. Each year, whenever there were minor advancements in fingerprint analysis techniques, image recognition, or vehicle data cross-referencing, the file was reopened to check for the possible emergence of new leads, although expectations always remained low due to the quite limited amount of original information remaining. The first step in the 2007-2013 period was to rerun all fingerprints collected from the Jeep and from items inside the vehicle through the AFES system, which was regularly updated within the state. Although the fingerprints had been carefully lifted and preserved, reclearing was always necessary whenever the recognition software was upgraded. However, AFES produced no matches beyond those fingerprints confirmed as belonging to Emily and Ryan. The fingerprints potentially belonging to someone else on the passenger door handle were deemed too smudged or lacking sufficient characteristic points for the system to automatically identify. Even so, technicians attempted manual comparison on a few partial prints, but the results still could not be linked to any records in criminal or civil databases. This caused the fingerprint-based investigative direction to stall. In parallel, the cold case review team decided to re-examine the entire list of Broncos statewide in Alaska, not just in the Cordova area. The purpose of this step was to find the possibility of another Bronco matching the tread pattern that had not been verified in 2006 due to registration data errors or because the owner changed address after the incident occurred. The vehicle list recheck was conducted through the DMV and local garages to verify whether any Bronco had its tires replaced, suspension repaired, or ownership transferred between late 2006 and 2007. However, the resulting list still only pointed to Broncos that had already been checked previously, or vehicles that had not been driven for extended periods and were unlikely to be related. Several other Broncos had been transferred to the Anchorage or Fairbanks areas, but after checking the timing of the paperwork, none were in the Cordova region at the time of the disappearance. Thus, although the expanded review provided updated data, no new vehicle entered the suspect pool. Regarding physical evidence, the Alaska State Troopers periodically reopened the sealed evidence boxes to reassess their analytical value based on available technology during 2008-2013. Technicians re-examined Emily's camera, memory card, tripod, 2 paper cups, gloves collected from the search area, and the paper map. These items were reviewed using newer image enhancement methods. However, the hardware and software limitations of the time meant that improvements to the quality of images from the DSLR camera were limited to slight increases in brightness and contrast. Attempts to recover details in the dark areas of the final photo only produced a clearer shape of a person's shadow, but did not reveal any new identifying features. The paper cups were re-examined for potential latent fingerprints, but the surface had been deformed by prior moisture, making the development of new prints unfeasible. The paper map was also reanalyzed for fibers or epithelial cells, but there was insufficient material to run DNA testing according to the standards of that time. Snow samples collected inside the Jeep, originally taken only to determine the age of the snow layer, were no longer usable as they had melted during storage. During the annual review meetings, the team consistently raised the question of whether the earlier SAR searches might have missed any areas in the Chugach forest. However, upon reviewing the Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3 search maps, all indicated that the rescue teams had fully covered all accessible pedestrian points under heavy snowfall conditions. With the available data, there was no reasonable justification to reopen a wide area search, especially without new evidence or additional witness statements. Another item reviewed during this period was the stored tire tread pattern sample. Technicians recompared the tread data with the list of aftermarket tires sold at Alaska stores during 2006-2007. However, although it matched several common off-road tire patterns, no store recorded any retail transaction that could be linked to a Bronco owner in the Cordova area. Most tire purchases at that time were made in cash, with no identifying records. The investigative team also attempted to consider whether the tread pattern might belong to an out-of-state vehicle, but the sheer volume of data and lack of sufficiently narrowing factors quickly led this direction to a dead end. From 2010 to 2013, many updates to image recognition technology and automated fingerprint analysis techniques became available. But the original hardware limitations and initial resolution of the evidence prevented any breakthrough. Each review merely recorded the same conclusion, no new exploitable details. The case file was therefore opened and closed multiple times according to procedure, and each time the conclusion remained the same: no progress, no superior hypothesis, no factors strong enough to reactivate field investigation. By the end of 2013, the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale remained firmly in the cold case category, with no indication that it would be solved anytime soon. In early 2014, the Alaska State Troopers implemented a new policy of reallocating some cold cases, and the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale, which had been in the cold case category for more than 7 years, was assigned to Detective Laura Jensen, an investigator who had recently transferred from the Analysis Division to the unit responsible for unsolved cases. Upon receiving the file, Laura took possession of the entire original evidence box: scene reports, photographs of tire tracks, SAR reports from all phases, sealed physical evidence, 3-level search maps, Bronco owner list, interview transcripts of Caleb Monroe, and lab technical reports from 2006-2013. After signing the chain of custody log, she spent the first several weeks simply reviewing every single document in detail, as a hallmark of cold cases is that very small oversights in the past can sometimes prove to be the overlooked key. Laura began with the morning scene report of December 23, 2006, carefully re-examining every line related to the position of the Jeep Cherokee and the surrounding traces. Here she discovered the first anomaly in a preliminary sketch drawn by the patrol team upon initial approach to the scene. The position of the unknown tire track was marked approximately 2 meters off from the position recorded in the official report. This discrepancy was not large, but if the correct position was the one originally sketched, the direction of travel of the suspect Bronco on the night of the disappearance would be slightly different from previous assumptions. Instead of simply traveling straight along Copper River Highway, the vehicle may have stopped closer to the side of the Jeep, suggesting a closer approach point. Laura noted that the erroneous reporting of the Bronco's stopping position may have skewed early terrain and behavioral analysis. She continued by reviewing the 2006 timeline, paying particular attention to the timestamp extracted from the fisherman's store camera. When cross-referencing the metadata of photos from Emily's camera memory card with the timeline times, Laura noticed a 4-minute discrepancy in the stored time. The store's camera system was off by nearly 2.5 minutes and had been manually corrected in 2006, but this correction did not perfectly match the time on Emily's camera when she took the Aurora photo series. The 4-minute difference did not drastically alter the essence of the timeline, but it could affect assumptions about the time Emily and Ryan traveled from the gas station to the location where the Jeep was abandoned. If the two left the gas station 4 minutes later than the timeline used in later reports, the approximately 20:45, 21 o'clock window, identified as the time of disappearance, would also be compressed. This led Laura to question whether the suspect Bronco could have approached them in a narrower time frame, and what that might imply for behavioral analysis. Continuing with the Bronco owner list, Laura examined each elimination decision made between 2007-2013. When she reached Caleb Monroe's file, she noticed that his elimination from suspicion was based solely on the initial interview and a visual observation of the snow-covered Bronco. There had been no in-depth technical inspection, no specific comparison of his Bronco's tread pattern with the scene photographs, and no objective evidence confirming that his vehicle was truly inactive on the night of December 22, as he claimed. Moreover, the report noted no suspicious activity observed in the cabin but this was based on external observation only, with no detailed search conducted due to insufficient grounds for a warrant. Laura flagged this as a significant oversight, as cold cases often remain unsolved because initial assumptions were accepted too readily without re-verification. Additionally, she reviewed the map of the area around Caleb's cabin and noticed that his cabin was located on a small trail that could access Copper River Highway without being easily detected, something noted in the 2006 report, but not incorporated into official analyses in subsequent years. This prompted Laura to question why a solitary individual with no alibi, owning a Bronco matching the tread pattern and living near the disappearance location, was eliminated from the list after only a single interview. When cross-referencing all the anomalies, the incorrectly recorded tire track position, the 4-minute timeline discrepancy, and the elimination of Caleb based purely on subjective assessment, Laura began to believe that accumulated errors across multiple stages may have caused the original investigation to veer off course. Therefore, she noted in the internal review report that Caleb Monroe's file should be reinstated to the list of persons of interest for complete re-examination, without relying on prior conclusions. This was clearly stated as a recommendation. Caleb Monroe, reinstated as person of interest, pending further verification. After completing the comprehensive review of all original documents, Laura closed the review report, concluding that the case was not truly deadlocked, but simply had not yet been approached from the right angle. She documented all these oversights as checkpoints to be verified when the opportunity to further examine the case arose. After completing the full review of the original file and identifying key discrepancies in the scene report, tire track position and timeline, Detective Laura Jensen began a new phase of reanalyzing the entire timeline, using more advanced technical tools available in 2014. She utilized next-generation GIS software, developed to simulate vehicle movement based on terrain, weather, and road surface conditions, to reconstruct the journey of the Jeep Cherokee and the suspect Bronco on the night of December 22, 2006. First, Laura input all historical weather data provided by NOAA, including wind speed, hourly snowfall amounts, road surface temperature, and visibility levels in Cordova and along Copper River Highway from 20 o'clock to 21:30. This data allowed the software to determine the conditions at the time, thereby simulating realistic travel speeds for different vehicle types under snowy and windy conditions. Next, she entered the precise coordinates of the Fisherman's Store gas station, the Jeep Discovery location, and the road segment between them. Since the 4-minute timeline discrepancy could affect calculations, Laura adjusted the departure time from the gas station based on Emily's camera photo metadata and card transaction information, setting it to approximately 2042 instead of the previous 2038. When the GIS software ran the first simulation with the Jeep traveling under initially light snowfall conditions that gradually worsened into near-blizzard levels near the Chugach Forest area, the results indicated that the Jeep would have taken approximately 12–14 minutes to reach the discovered location, depending on actual speed and visibility. This placed the victim's arrival at the Jeep abandonment site around 2054–2056. Laura then simulated the possibility of a second vehicle traveling the same road segment during the corresponding time window. Since the tread pattern indicated the suspect Bronco was likely fitted with large off-road tires, the software adjusted speed parameters accordingly for vehicle type and weight, while also applying deceleration factors when approaching the road edge where snow coverage was uneven. After setting the corresponding parameters, Laura assigned the Bronco starting points at one of 3 possible access points to Copper River Highway via trails near Caleb Monroe's cabin. When these simulations were run, the software showed that it would take a Bronco approximately 10–14 minutes to travel from the cabin to the Jeep location, depending on snow traction and visibility conditions. Critically, the 3 Bronco approach simulations all overlapped with the same time window in which the Jeep was stopped, specifically around 2054–21 o'clock. This matched the previously established disappearance time frame, but was now narrowed and more precise thanks to the corrected gas station departure time. When Laura compared the simulated timeline with the tire track position marked in the original scene sketch, which had been offset by 2 meters in the final report, she noticed that the correct tire track position perfectly aligned with one of the 3 Bronco approach simulations where the vehicle came up behind the Jeep, stopped for a few seconds to about a minute, then departed. The software further showed that if the Bronco had stopped at the originally sketched position, the departure track would have angled slightly toward the trail rather than continuing straight along the highway, as previously assumed. This led Laura to note that the initial misinformation about the Bronco's stopping position may have caused the entire 2006 analysis to miss the possibility that the Bronco did not merely pass by, but actually stopped close to the Jeep. To increase accuracy, Laura incorporated wind speed data from that time into the simulation. When recalculated, the software showed that strong northeasterly winds could have altered the depth and coverage pattern of the snow layer, explaining why only very faint impressions of the tire track remained after fresh snowfall. This confirmed that the tire track was not an old mark from another vehicle on a different day, but most likely appeared just hours before the Jeep was discovered. Laura also cross-referenced the simulation with the recorded blizzard data for December 22. According to NOAA, snowfall intensity increased sharply from 2050 to 2110, the period when thick snow was capable of erasing footprints or obscuring soft surface traces. This data aligned with the fact that only the deeper tire impressions, which bore greater weight, remained, while all other signs around the Jeep were completely covered. When running the final simulation, depicting 2 vehicles present on the same road segment and stopping close to each other for less than 2 minutes, the software results showed the highest probability scenario placed the simultaneous presence of the Jeep and Bronco at that location between 2055–2057. This finding was consistent with all logical data in the file and strengthened the possibility that the Bronco was indeed present at the time of the victim's disappearance. When Laura cross-checked all simulations against the information about Caleb's cabin, which lay directly on one of the 3 possible approach routes for the Bronco, she clearly stated in the Timeline Analysis Report, 2014 GIS simulation results indicate that the suspect Ford Bronco very likely appeared within the disappearance time window, with a stopping point coinciding with the Jeep location. This is a new factor never confirmed during the 2007–2013 review periods. After completing all simulations, Laura saved the data and concluded that modern techniques had enabled a more accurate reconstruction of the final minutes before Emily and Ryan disappeared, and that the Bronco's presence at the same time was no longer merely a vague suspicion, but a possibility supported by technical evidence. Based on the 2014 GIS simulation results showing the possibility that Caleb Monroe's Bronco appeared simultaneously with Emily and Ryan's Jeep within the time frame of the disappearance, Detective Laura Jensen decided that the next step must be to conduct a second interview with Caleb to check the consistency between his 2006 statement and the new technical data. In early 2015, she sent an official invitation letter to Caleb, requesting him to come to the Alaska State Trooper Station in Cordova to update information in the cold case file. Caleb appeared on time, still displaying his familiar calm demeanor, but the fact that he chose to come alone drew even more attention from Laura, as most people previously invited, in connection with cold cases, tended to appear nervous or wanted to bring a lawyer. The interview took place in a small interrogation room, with 2 security cameras recording. Laura began with light questions to keep Caleb from feeling pressured, his daily routine, current job, and the condition of his Bronco. When moving to the main content, Laura reopened the transcript of Caleb's 2006 statement, in which he firmly asserted that on the night of December 22nd, he had stayed inside the cabin the entire evening, never left the house, and that his Bronco was broken and could not be used. She then explained that the investigative team was reviewing the entire file due to technological updates, particularly the new GIS simulation that allows more precise analysis of vehicle movements under harsh weather conditions. She asked Caleb if he would agree to re-examine his statement in light of the new technical information. Caleb nodded, showing cooperation. But his eyes showed a flash of wariness when Laura mentioned the vehicle simulation. Laura presented the newly adjusted timeline that the victim's Jeep left the gas station around 2042 and arrived at the final location around 2054, 2056. She then asked Caleb to reaffirm his schedule. Caleb repeated his original statement. He was in the cabin all evening, never left the house, and was certain the Bronco was not operational. At this point, Laura showed him a printed GIS simulation, not the full version, only a simple diagram illustrating 3 possible routes by which a Bronco could reach the location where the Jeep was abandoned within the 2050, 21 o'clock time window. She explained that the simulation system indicated a Bronco had stopped right next to the Jeep during that period. The moment Laura mentioned the appearance of the Bronco within the disappearance timeframe, Caleb shifted his posture, crossing his arms in front of his chest, a clear defensive sign that Laura immediately noted. She continued asking, "Are you completely certain that you did not leave the cabin between 2040 and 2110? Caleb was silent for a few seconds before replying that, "I don't remember exactly every minute," but he still maintained that the Bronco was not operational at that time. Laura immediately seized on this small inconsistency because in his 2006 statement, Caleb had very decisively said he clearly remembered not leaving the cabin at any point that evening. Now, saying he didn't remember every specific minute was a noticeable change. Laura followed up, "If you didn't leave the cabin, then how can you be so sure no one else used the Bronco?" Caleb answered that no one else had the keys. When Laura mentioned that the GIS simulation confirmed a Bronco appeared exactly when the Jeep stopped, Caleb immediately said it must have been someone else's vehicle, an unusually quick denial, since Laura had not yet stated it was his Bronco, only that the simulation used the corresponding vehicle type. Laura noted this as the second inconsistency. To test his reaction, Laura asked whether he had ever lent the vehicle to anyone before. He replied, "Never." She continued, "Can you provide any evidence to confirm you were in the cabin the entire time?" Caleb hesitated for a few seconds before saying he was home alone, so no one could serve as a witness. In the 2006 file, he had described in detail the times he chopped wood and went to bed, but now his answers were much more vague. The third inconsistency was recorded. Laura continued probing weather-related details. "That night the wind was very strong. Did you hear any vehicles passing by?" Caleb answered, "I didn't hear anything." But when specifically asked whether he could have heard the sound of a large engine like the Bronco running near the cabin, Caleb replied, "I'm not sure, maybe I was already asleep," completely contradicting his original statement that he stayed up late reviewing vehicle repair paperwork. The fourth inconsistency emerged when Laura mentioned that the tire tracks at the scene matched the tread pattern of a 1995 off-road Bronco. Caleb immediately said he had switched to standard tires at the end of 2006, but DMV records and garage documents showed no evidence of any such tire change. In the 2006 report, he had said the tires were old, but still usable. The fifth inconsistency appeared, and more importantly, his new statement perfectly matched the exact data gap that Laura had previously identified as an oversight in the old file. By this point, Laura psychologically concluded that Caleb was adjusting his statement to fit the data he believed she possessed, even though in reality, she had only provided a portion of the simulation. At the conclusion of the interview, Laura summarized all the inconsistencies: the no longer certain time of leaving the cabin, the changed condition of the Bronco compared to the original statement, the defensive reflex behavior when the GIS simulation was mentioned, and the hesitation when discussing the possibility of someone else using the vehicle. All of these became clear indicators that Caleb Monroe's statement was no longer reliable. In the final interview evaluation report, Laura wrote, "Caleb Monroe inconsistent statements under re-interview behavior indicates withheld information, highly probable involvement." From someone who had been eliminated as a suspect in 2006, based solely on a brief interview, Caleb Monroe officially became the primary suspect in the cold case of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale. Although the 2015 second interview elevated Caleb Monroe to primary suspect status with a series of inconsistencies in his statements, Detective Laura Jensen still faced a serious obstacle. There was no hard evidence sufficient under legal standards to obtain a search warrant for his cabin or Bronco. Everything she had consisted only of the GIS simulation, indicating the possibility of the Bronco appearing at the Jeep's location at the time of the disappearance, along with the inconsistencies in Caleb's statements when confronted with new technical information. However, legally, a simulation cannot be considered direct evidence, and statement inconsistencies alone cannot form the basis for a search warrant without accompanying physical elements. From 2016 onward, Laura submitted a report recommending expanded investigation, including a recommendation to seek court permission for a search warrant of Caleb's cabin based on the GIS data, tire track location, and his inconsistent timeline. But the Troopers Review Board determined that the file still lacked the key element. Specifically, there was no physical evidence directly connecting Caleb to the victims, and no witness confirming the Bronco's presence in the area at the time of the disappearance. Therefore, the request was not approved. When Laura attempted to strengthen the case by proposing advanced analysis of Emily's final photo, the one showing the blurry figure, the state's technical department stated that high-level image processing required new equipment beyond that year's budget. Although she argued that the photo was one of the rare pieces of evidence that could directly connect to the moment of disappearance, the proposal was postponed because the state prioritized funding for active cases, not cold cases over a decade old. In 2017, Laura continued to recommend placing the photo in the queue for analysis with newer technology being tested in Anchorage, but the request list was too long and active cases with current suspects took priority. This caused the Emily-Ryan file to be downgraded to low priority and kept in pending review status, with no specific implementation date. Meanwhile, Laura tried to gather additional information to strengthen suspicion against Caleb by reapproaching the DMV, checking for any changes related to his Bronco, such as registration renewals, repairs, or ownership transfers, but found nothing noteworthy. Caleb still owned the Bronco, had not sold it, transferred ownership, or taken it in for repairs at any garage during the 2016-2018 period. This made the vehicle an even bigger point of suspicion, yet it simultaneously created a deadlock. No one could access or inspect the vehicle without a search warrant. Laura also revisited some of Caleb's former neighbors to inquire about his situation in the years following the disappearance, hoping to find unusual changes or new statements. However, most neighbors described him as a reclusive person who rarely interacted but caused no trouble or suspicious behavior. No one had verifiable information about his schedule in previous years, as he mostly lived alone. Caleb's financial activities were also examined for signs of unusual spending related to vehicle repairs, equipment purchases, or items that might suggest concealment behavior, but all his transactions remained within normal ranges. There was no evidence he had purchased new tires, replaced vehicle parts, or made any expenditures directly related to the disappearance area. This made connecting him to the scene nearly impossible using traditional methods. Within the Alaska State Troopers, the Emily Hart and Ryan Hale case began to be regarded as one of the most difficult files due to having far fewer leads than other cold cases from the same period. The tire tracks, once the most important clue, still could not be directly linked to Caleb's Bronco because no actual tire measurements were available for comparison. The figure in the final photo could not be clearly analyzed. There was no DNA, no footprints, no physical samples of legal value, no witnesses, no other unusual reports coinciding with the time. In the 2017 and 2018 review meetings, the case was repeatedly assessed as lacking a foothold and required suspension of all investigative efforts until a new approach emerged or external information appeared. This put Laura in what cold case investigators often call the dead phase, the stage where the file neither progresses nor can be closed because a suspect has not been fully eliminated. For 2 consecutive years, she could not obtain a search warrant for Caleb's cabin or vehicle, nor access new physical evidence, causing the investigation to virtually stall. Every year-end review report stated, "No change." Investigation moved to pending status. This was the conclusion Laura hated writing the most, but she had no alternative. From 2016 through the end of 2018, the Emily Ryan file was almost completely stalled. Every approach led toward Caleb, but all stopped just short of the threshold of hard evidence required by law. In early spring 2019, as ice on the side branches of the Iac River began to melt with the strong current, a group of local fishermen discovered a small black object lodged among drifting logs near the shore. When they retrieved it, they realized it was an old Nikon camera, heavily scratched and with a deformed lens, showing signs it had been underwater for many years. Because the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale remained a story somewhat remembered in the community, one of the fishermen immediately notified the Cordova Police Department upon seeing the Nikon logo matching the type Emily had used. The camera was promptly transferred to the Alaska State Troopers and then forwarded to the forensic lab for examination. In the laboratory, technicians noted mild corrosion on the body, damaged control buttons, but surprisingly the memory card compartment remained intact. When the cover was opened, they found a 2 GB memory card, exactly the type commonly used in 2005-2006. This was a significant detail because memory cards have a better chance of preserving data than the camera itself when submerged for long periods. After drying and cleaning the card surface, the lab proceeded with data extraction using a specialized reader. Initially, recovery software detected over 60 corrupted files, most unreadable due to water damage to the data structure. However, when switching to deep recovery mode, the technicians unexpectedly recovered 4 partially intact image files, all taken within the time frame immediately following Emily and Ryan's departure from the gas station. The timestamp data showed these photos were taken within 2-3 minutes after the Aurora series that the lab had recovered in 2006 from the memory card in the Jeep. This proved that the Nikon found in the river was not the camera recovered from the Jeep, but a second camera that Emily had brought along for Aurora photography. This discovery had never been recorded previously because the family only knew of her main camera, but her habit of carrying an additional backup camera was entirely consistent with years of photography practice. When the new photos were opened, the first 3 showed only faint light from the road direction, mixed with long streaks of light, caused by Emily moving the camera in dark conditions. Image quality was poor, with heavy noise, but the distant background was clearer than in the photos previously seen on the old memory card. However, the 4th photo, and the most important one, captured a small trail running parallel to Copper River Highway, only a few hundred meters from where the Jeep was found. In the image, at the edge of the frame appeared a silhouette of a person standing sideways, with much clearer body contours than the blurry silhouette in the 2006 photo. Thanks to the angle as Emily gently turned the camera left, the figure appeared relatively complete from shoulders to knees, with arms hanging down and a motionless stance, as though observing the Jeep from a distance. The lab enhanced the brightness, adjusted contrast, and reduced noise, obtaining a blurry but consistent body shape, a male silhouette with a solid build, broad shoulders, wearing a hat, or having a rounded head shadow. Although the face was not visible, the body structure indicated a height of approximately 5'10" inches to 6'0" inches, 1 m78 to 1 m83. The forensic technician immediately noted, silhouette significantly clearer than the one recovered in 2006, likely the same person or same location. When Laura received the lab report, she immediately noticed the critical difference. The silhouette in the new photo stood facing the Jeep directly. Not a reflection from the store, but a real person present in the area after the vehicle had reached the trail vicinity. Comparing the recovered timestamp from metadata, she realized this final photo exactly matched the time frame the GIS simulation had previously identified as approximately 2055-2057, precisely when the suspect Bronco was likely to have stopped beside the Jeep. The convergence between the GIS data and the newly recovered photo created an intersection point that the case had lacked for over 13 years. This was the first time direct visual evidence appeared, showing someone other than Emily and Ryan was present at the disappearance location at the critical moment. The discovery was immediately entered into the cold case file as the most important new evidence since 2006, opening an entirely new investigative direction for a case that had been stalled for many years. The clearer silhouette photo recovered from the Nikon that had drifted under the Iac River was immediately sent to the Alaska State Troopers' Advanced Image Analysis Unit for photogrammetry analysis. The technique of reconstructing three-dimensional shapes from two-dimensional photographs based on standard ratios and fixed reference points in the scene. Since the photo captured the trail near Copper River Highway, where distances between marker posts and roadside trees could be accurately measured in the field, technicians were able to determine Emily's exact shooting position and the figure's position in the image. After reconstructing the space using photogrammetry, they determined the relative height of the silhouette, arm length, shoulder width, and vertical body tilt. These data were fed into an AI body shape analysis model, the type of software used in cases to identify suspects from low-quality surveillance footage. The photo was passed through edge extraction filters, a hypothetical skeletal model was reconstructed, and then the software compared the body form against baseline data. Although the silhouette showed no facial details, the software could still perform identification based on ratio markers, shoulder to waist to head to leg proportions, standing angle, and estimated height. The figure's height was estimated at 5'10" ed 5'10", 6'0" inches, 1m79, 1m84. Consistent with Caleb Monroe's DMV record of 5'11" inches, 1m81. The shoulder width in the photo, after normalization to real-world distance ratios, was calculated at approximately 48-50 centimeters, matching Caleb's driver's license shoulder measurement of 49 centimeters. The most notable point was the arm-to-body height ratio, one of the most stable and highly identifying characteristics. The silhouette in the photo showed arm length occupying about 44% of body height, while Caleb's DMV record placed him in the mesomorph body type group with a similar ratio. Furthermore, the AI model noted that the silhouette's rightward body tilt matched Caleb's posture in a 2013 DMV video recorded when he renewed his license, where he tended to stand not completely straight due to an old left hip injury. When the software completed the first comparison round, the system reported a compatibility index of 74% between the silhouette and Caleb's body profile. However, after technicians refined the model with newly balanced brightness and contrast from the Nikon photo, the index rose to 87%, a very high match rate for a noisy, low-light photograph. The report noted, silhouette in photo 4 matches Caleb Monroe's body parameters at 87%. This compatibility rate exceeds the typical 60-70% threshold commonly seen in photogrammetry and AI morphological identification cases. When the report reached Detective Laura Jensen, she immediately compared this 87% figure against the remaining suspects in the file. The 2 other suspects from the original list of 28 Bronco owners had been completely eliminated back in 2007, and no one else in the file had a similar height, build, or travel history near the disappearance area as Caleb. After consideration, Laura concluded that if the silhouette was not Caleb, then the person would have to have an almost identical build to him, appear in the exact location, at the exact time, on the exact terrain, something that, in reality, would be extremely unlikely in a remote, snowy forested area like Cordova on a blizzard night in late 2006. Additionally, prior GIS simulation data indicated that the suspect Bronco had been present at the Jeep's location at the time of the disappearance, and Caleb's cabin lay directly along a possible access route to the area. The alignment between the GIS model and silhouette analysis reinforced the argument that only one person in the entire cold case file fit all the elements, Caleb Monroe. Going further, Laura requested the algorithm be run against all DMV records within a 25-mile radius of Cordova in 2006 to rule out coincidental body matches. The results showed that in the entire area, only 2 individuals had height and body structure comparable to Caleb, but one had left the state in 2005 and the other had a clear alibi at the time of the incident. This transformed the 87% figure from a mere technical number into strong indirect evidence that the silhouette in the photo was Caleb. When Laura combined all the data, matching Bronco tire tracks, GIS simulation showing simultaneous presence, inconsistent statements from the 2015 interview, and now AI analysis exceeding the threshold, she entered into the internal report the conclusion, Caleb Monroe, elevated to priority suspect #1. The file was updated with the new status, stating that Caleb was no longer merely a person of interest to monitor, but officially became the top priority suspect in the Emily Hart and Ryan Hale case after more than 13 years unresolved. After analyzing the image, the AI confirmed that the silhouette in the Nikon photo matches 87% with Caleb Monroe's body measurements, and his profile was elevated to priority suspect #1. Detective Laura Jensen began compiling all legally admissible evidence to prepare the affidavit for a search warrant of Caleb's cabin and his Bronco. This was the first time in over 13 years that the case had strong connecting elements between the suspect and the time of the disappearance, and Laura understood that every detail had to be presented accurately and coherently to convince the judge that it was time to expand the investigation through coercive measures. First, Laura compiled the new silhouette analysis report under the category of indirect photographic evidence, a classification used for cases where the face is not clearly shown but identification is possible through body proportions, height, and overall morphology based on photogrammetry. The report clearly stated that the photo recovered in 2019 was not the one found in the Jeep in 2006, but entirely new data with high reliability, recovered from an intact memory card discovered under the ice of the Iac River. In particular, Laura emphasized that the silhouette in the photo was stationary on the trail at precisely the time frame when the Jeep stopped, aligning exactly with the GIS simulation, indicating the presence of the Bronco at the scene. The fact that the silhouette matched 87% of Caleb's DMV body data, including height, shoulder width, and characteristic torso tilt due to an old injury, was presented as a quantitative factor, not speculation. Next, Laura introduced the second piece of evidence, the Bronco tread data from the 2006 scene. Although the tread pattern only matched a common group of off-road tires, the tire track position had been incorrectly recorded in the original report, and later recovered from the initial 2006 sketch, and was re-simulated in the 2014 GIS, showing that the tread trajectory fit the stopping path of a 1992-1995 Bronco exactly at the location where the figure appeared in the Nikon photo. Laura stressed that Caleb Monroe's cabin was located directly on one of only 3 routes that the GIS simulation indicated a Bronco could have taken to reach the highway and arrive at the Jeep's position. When combining these elements, the likelihood of another Bronco appearing at the exact time, exact location, with the correct tire size and direction of travel became extremely low. The third piece of evidence Laura presented was Caleb's change in statements in 2015, when confronted with the GIS model. Clear contradictions regarding his whereabouts in the cabin, the operational status of the Bronco, and his assertion that he never loaned the vehicle to anyone. This was important behavioral evidence, suggesting the suspect might conceal information when confronted with new technical data. In the warrant affidavit, Laura detailed 3 major inconsistencies in his statements, changing from "I clearly remember being home all evening" to "I'm not sure about every minute," from "the Bronco was broken and not running" to "I replaced the standard tires at the end of 2006, despite no garage records to confirm," and from "I didn't hear anything that night" to "maybe I was asleep," which directly contradicted his earlier description of staying up late to review paperwork. Next, Laura attached the 2014 GIS report simulating the simultaneous presence of the Jeep and Bronco at the disappearance location, emphasizing that this was a simulation based on NOAA data, actual terrain, trail context, and weather conditions on the night of December 22, 2006. Not subjective assumption. The GIS showed the Bronco approaching the Jeep between 2055-2057, exactly matching the time the silhouette appeared in the Nikon photo. Finally, Laura presented the legal argument. While each individual piece of evidence might not suffice on its own for a search warrant, when combined, 87% silhouette match, tread consistent with Bronco class, Caleb's cabin on a key access route, statement contradictions, and GIS timeline alignment, they formed a strong logical chain meeting the probable cause standard for issuing a search warrant. The affidavit exceeded 40 pages and was submitted to the district judge's office in June 2019. The review hearing was held in chambers and lasted longer than expected because the judge requested clarification on the reliability of the Nikon photo recovered after 13 years. A forensic technician was required to testify, explaining why the memory card still retained data and why the silhouette image retained legal value. After a full presentation that the card was protected by the camera's intact casing, the metadata was pristine, and the data was recovered at a stable level. The judge accepted that the photo could be considered new and valuable evidence without questionable origin. Once the three key points, silhouette, tread, and timeline, were confirmed to meet the reasonable ground standard, the judge issued the official decision, a search warrant for Caleb Monroe's cabin, his dark green Ford Bronco, and the entire property owned by him was approved. The warrant explicitly defined the scope: the main cabin storage shed, a 50-meter radius around the cabin, the interior and exterior of the Bronco, and any auxiliary structures within the area. This was the most significant turning point since 2006, the first time in over 13 years of stalled files that investigators were granted direct access to the suspect's residence. Upon receiving the signed and stamped warrant, Detective Laura Jensen officially prepared to enter the phase of proactive investigative assault, something no investigator had achieved in this case for many years. Immediately after the search warrant was approved, Detective Laura Jensen coordinated with the Alaska State Troopers crime scene team to execute a discreet and procedurally correct approach to Caleb Monroe's cabin. In early July 2019, with dry weather and the trail to the cabin sufficiently safe for specialized vehicles, the team was divided into three groups. Group 1 entered the cabin through the main door. Group 2 checked the rear storage area, and Group 3 focused on the dark green Bronco parked nearby. When Caleb was asked to step outside the cabin to be read the warrant in accordance with the law, he appeared flustered, his expression visibly changing upon seeing the number of investigators. His cabin was only about 25 square meters, consisting of a main living area, a small sleeping bed, a makeshift kitchen, and homemade tool shelves. Upon entry, Group 1 conducted a rapid sweep of the entire space to identify any suspicious items. Although the cabin was tidy and sparsely furnished, investigators immediately noticed a gray-blue wool scarf tucked deep at the bottom of a wooden crate containing old clothes. The scarf had a distinctive woven pattern that, according to family descriptions, matched the one Emily had taken on many photography hunting trips. When lifted, the technician noted a small tear on the edge, consistent with descriptions in archived photos of Emily's belongings. This item was immediately seized, placed in a separate evidence bag, and labeled wool scarf suspected to belong to victim, Caleb Monroe cabin. Continuing the search of an old bookshelf in the corner, investigators found a well-worn 2005 Chugach topographic paper map. While not unusual for someone living near the forest, what made Laura pause was a series of pencil markings, several small circles drawn around certain mountain gullies, including one location that matched the difficult-to-access valley identified by SAR in 2006 and marked with GPS coordinates on the Tier 3 search map. There was no apparent reason for Caleb to have precisely marked that exact area if he was merely a local resident, as previously claimed. The map was immediately sealed as key evidence, labeled map marked with suspicious areas, Caleb Monroe cabin. Meanwhile, Group 3 searched the Bronco. They unlocked the vehicle using the keys Caleb was required to provide under the warrant, then inspected the cab, rear seats, and entire cargo area. The Bronco smelled musty, showing signs of infrequent use, but in the rear cargo bed, investigators found a long hair caught on the rusted metal edge of a storage compartment. Because the hair was light brown, matching Emily's hair color, the technician immediately collected the sample with sterile tweezers and preserved it in a specialized DNA tube. This was the first piece of evidence directly linked to the victim found in Caleb's possession after more than 13 years since the disappearance. Nearby, they found 2 shorter hairs caught on the right rear seat leg. All were collected and sealed separately. Under the driver's seat, investigators discovered an old leather-wrapped box. Inside was a .44 Magnum revolver with a very thin layer of gun oil still present, indicating it had been preserved but not used for a long time. Although the firearm was not directly related to the disappearance description, Caleb's possession of a powerful weapon that he had not declared and had concealed in the vehicle made it potential evidence of dangerous or threatening behavior. The gun was sealed according to protocol and forwarded to ballistics for analysis. In the storage shed behind the cabin, Group 2 examined tool crates, shovels, handsaws, and ropes. No items showed blood or decomposition signs, but several tools had fresh grinding marks, raising suspicion that they had been thoroughly cleaned. To avoid missing anything, all suspected metal tools were collected for trace analysis. After searching the entire 50-meter radius around the cabin, investigators found no signs of recent digging or buried objects, but they noted that the area behind the cabin had many large rocks covering the ground, making deep visual inspection difficult. Once all key evidence, the wool scarf, marked map, hair samples, .44 Magnum, and suspected tools had been collected, the team completed an on-site evidence log, photographed each discovery location, and assigned chain of custody codes to every item. The evidence was placed in specialized containers, sealed, and transported directly to the Alaska State Troopers Forensic Analysis Center. Caleb Monroe was required to remain outside the cabin throughout the search, and when the final item was sealed, he kept a fixed stare, but clearly showed unhideable tension. With the first substantial direct evidence since 2006, the cabin search became a major turning point in the case. After completing the cabin search and seizing a series of key items, Detective Laura Jensen knew the next step could not be delayed. Caleb Monroe needed to be taken into custody before he had the chance to leave the area, destroy evidence, or interfere with the investigation. An arrest warrant was approved by the judge that same afternoon based on the newly obtained evidence, especially the suspected Emily scarf, the map marking gullies, matching the 2006 search area, and the hair samples from the Bronco cargo area. To maintain the element of surprise, the team decided not to approach the cabin immediately after the search, but instead set up surveillance on Caleb from a distance to avoid raising suspicion or prompting flight. A covert observation team was positioned in the forest less than 200 meters from the cabin, in an area that could monitor the front door and trail to the highway without being detected. About an hour after the search team left, Caleb appeared at the door, clearly tense. He stood looking around the area, scanning the trail, and repeatedly rubbing his face as if trying to calm himself. After a few minutes, he locked the cabin and began walking along the trail toward the sparse forest leading to Copper River Highway, the only route allowing him to reach town or attempt to leave Cordova. As Caleb moved deeper into the trail, the surveillance team reported to Laura, confirming the suspect had left the cabin and was traveling along a segment where a safe intercept was possible. Immediately, Team 2 moved into a blocking position on a narrow section of trail between 2 rows of spruce trees, where only single-file passage was possible, and Caleb would have no escape route if he spotted police. The tactical team established a containment perimeter in minutes, remaining silent until Caleb came clearly into view. When he was about 15 meters away, an officer stepped forward, raised the arrest warrant, and signaled him to stop. Caleb, startled, took a step back, but had nowhere to go. Two officers from behind slowly advanced, fully surrounding the path. The lead officer read the arrest warrant, aloud per procedure. "Mr. Caleb Monroe, you are under arrest in connection with the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale. Any resistance will be met with lawful force. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney." Caleb was initially silent, then muttered a few words, that "I didn't do anything, but did not resist." He extended his hands forward to be cuffed according to protocol. His face no longer held the calm demeanor seen in previous interviews. Instead, it showed a mixture of confusion and despair, as though he understood the cabin search had pushed everything beyond salvage. After being cuffed, the team immediately patted him down to ensure he had no weapons or dangerous items. He was carrying only a small folding knife, a lighter, and the cabin keys. These items were temporarily seized and logged in the on-scene arrest report. Caleb was then led out of the trail to a waiting patrol vehicle on Copper River Highway. The entire process occurred in silence, except for routine requests such as identity confirmation and rights reminders. When placed in the back of the patrol car, Caleb lowered his head, showing no violent reaction, but his eyes kept looking toward the forest, where his cabin remained behind, holding secrets he could no longer conceal. Investigators immediately transported Caleb to Cordova PD headquarters under the arrest warrant, ensuring continuous supervision throughout the transfer. There he was booked into the system, fingerprinted, photographed for identification, and placed in a holding cell pending formal interview. The team completed a full arrest report documenting the moment Caleb left the cabin, the intercept location, the suspect's reaction, and his condition at arrest. When Caleb entered the Cordova PD holding area, it marked the first time in over 13 years that the Emily Hart and Ryan Hale case had a suspect taken into custody under an official warrant, the most significant advancement in the investigation to date. Immediately after Caleb Monroe was brought to Cordova PD, Detective Laura Jensen, along with two other investigators, prepared the interview room, arranging all necessary evidence copies and supporting documents for direct confrontation. When Caleb entered, hands still cuffed in front per regulation, he appeared tired, but still tried to maintain composure. Laura began by the book, rereading his Miranda rights to silence and counsel. Caleb nodded that he understood, but did not immediately request an attorney, a common sign among suspects who believe they can control the situation with vague statements. The interview opened with Laura clearly stating that the cabin and Bronco had been lawfully searched, and Caleb had one chance to explain the newly discovered evidence. After a few initial questions to gauge reaction, Laura placed the wool scarf on the table, still sealed in a transparent evidence bag. Caleb avoided looking directly at it, his throat visibly twitching, a tension sign Laura immediately noted. She then presented the marked Chugach topographic map found in the cabin. When asked why he had marked those particular gullies, Caleb replied that he only used the map for hunting. Laura did not immediately challenge him but moved to the bag containing the hair samples recovered from the Bronco. When she placed the tube in the center of the table, Caleb stared at it, then looked down, his hands clenching tightly together. At this point, Laura presented the 2014 GIS data, the printed simulation of the Jeep and Bronco paths, especially the 3 viable routes the Bronco could have taken to reach the abandoned Jeep location. She placed the simulation in front of Caleb and asked, "Do you want to explain why this simulation shows a Bronco stopping exactly at the place and time Emily and Ryan disappeared, when you claimed you were inside your cabin?" Caleb responded with maybe someone else had a Bronco, but his voice was weak and lacked the confidence of previous interviews. Laura immediately placed the clear silhouette photo from the Nikon recovered under the Eyak River on the table. The image forensic analysis had concluded matched Caleb's body structure at 87%. When the photo appeared before him, Caleb closed his eyes for several seconds, then opened them but looked away. Laura pointed to the silhouette and spoke slowly and clearly. This is the person standing near Emily and Ryan's Jeep at 2056. Whose body is this, if not yours? With no room left to evade, Caleb began breathing more heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. When Laura referenced the 2015 statement contradictions, particularly his claim that the Bronco was broken yet later changed the reason when pressed, Caleb's hands started shaking. Finally, Laura asked directly, "How did you get Emily and Ryan out of the Jeep?" A silence lasting more than 10 seconds followed. Caleb did not answer. Laura continued, "Your map marks the gullies east of Sheridan Glacier. What's there?" Caleb's gaze gradually shifted from defiance to resignation, the stage where many suspects realize all escape routes have closed. He lowered his head, muttered something unclear, then spoke louder. "I just wanted them to get off the road. At first that was all it was." This was the first indirect admission in over 13 years. Laura did not let him stop. She asked, "Where did you take them?" Caleb remained silent, but his shoulders slumped. "I took them along the trail. I told them there was shelter nearby, to get out of the storm." Laura kept her voice calm, and after that, Caleb exhaled heavily, voice hoarse. "They panicked, and everything got out of control." Laura asked him to clarify, but Caleb shook his head, refusing to detail further. However, when she returned to the map and pointed to the largest circle, the one just below the ridgeline under Sheridan Glacier, Caleb stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "There's a gully there. Pretty hard to get down. Nobody goes into that area. That's where." He stopped before continuing, but Laura needed no more words to understand. "That's where you took them?" Caleb nodded. "That's where the bodies of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale have been for the past 13 years? Caleb raised both hands to cover his face, but nodded again. An investigator recorded the entire exchange per protocol, and Laura immediately asked him to mark the precise location on the map. Caleb pointed to the area approximately 2 miles southeast of Sheridan Glacier, where a trail he frequently used led down into a deep gully that the 2006 SR team could not reach due to steep slopes and blizzard conditions at the time. After marking it, Caleb spoke softly but clearly, "They're there." This admission was immediately documented, signed by both investigators and the suspect. For the first time since the disappearance, the case had direct information leading to a probable location of the remains, a critical breakthrough never achieved in over 13 years of cold case files. Immediately after Caleb Monroe pointed out the location of the crevasse near Sheridan Glacier, where he admitted to leaving the bodies of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale, the Alaska State Troopers activated a special search plan, mobilizing the coordination of a professional SESAR team, a drone operations unit, and a technical group using GPR equipment to survey the rugged terrain. In early August 2019, when weather conditions allowed access to higher elevations, the search team set out. The area Caleb marked was about 2 miles from the main trail, consisting of steep slopes, large boulders, and layers of snow and ice accumulated over multiple consecutive winters. Drones were deployed first to conduct an aerial survey, collecting high-resolution imagery and creating a complete 3D map of the entire valley. Equipped with infrared cameras and LiDAR, the drones could detect surface anomalies, particularly areas of snow subsidence or differing density, indicators of underlying voids or foreign objects. During more than an hour of scanning, the drone recorded an area with unusually low reflectivity, located right next to a protruding rock ledge, less than 50 meters from the position Caleb had marked. This signal prompted the search team to focus on that area and switch to using GPR to determine the subsurface structure beneath the snow. The GPR equipment was placed on the thick snow surface and dragged along the curved slope meter by meter. After several initial scans yielded no results, a scan line directed toward the depression in the slope clearly detected a cavity anomaly signal, a natural void between the ice and rock layers, approximately 1.2 meters deep below the surface. This was a typical signature found in crevasses with old groundwater channels or rock hollows covered after blizzards. As the SR team expanded the scan area, 2 additional anomalies appeared right next to the initial void, forming a cluster of signals consistent with the presence of non-natural objects. After precisely determining the coordinates, the SR team began excavating the snow. The work proceeded carefully, as the steep terrain meant the snow could easily collapse if dug too aggressively. Using specialized shovels and ice-cutting tools, they gradually peeled away layers of densely compacted, almost rock-hard snow. When they reached a slightly grayer layer of snow, the forensic technician ordered a pause to inspect with a probe camera. The camera threaded through a small gap revealed a large cavity below, spacious enough to contain 2 adult bodies, matching Caleb's description that it was a place no one could reach during the 2006 storm. The SR team continued widening the entrance, and after nearly 2 hours, they encountered frozen, decayed fabric identified as the remnants of a jacket. The moment the fibers were sighted, the scene was placed under strict lockdown to ensure every subsequent step followed forensic protocol. Troopers' forensic specialists approached the site, using soft brushes and low heat to separate the ice without damaging the underlying objects. Within minutes, the team discovered a human tibia, still intact within the ice and fabric. As they further expanded the cavity area, a second set of remains was found offset to the right, with rib bones still partially encased in dark thermal jacket material, matching the description of the clothing Ryan was wearing the night he disappeared. The specialist confirmed the presence of 2 sets of remains, one closer to the entrance, the other deeper inside, suggesting the victims had been pushed or pulled into the crevasse in sequence. There were no signs of post-fall movement, indicating the bodies had remained in place, preserved by ice and snow, for over 13 years. Once the cavity was opened wide enough for direct access, the forensic team began recovering each skeletal element, numbering them, photographing them, and documenting them according to strict protocol. Personal items also gradually appeared: a rusted zipper, fragments of a small backpack fabric, a loose button, and a rubber wristband, the exact type Emily commonly wore when out photographing. After more than 5 hours of excavation and recovery, the SAR team successfully extracted both sets of remains from the crevasse. The bodies were placed in preservation bags and transported by specialized snowmobile down the mountain, then transferred to a helicopter for delivery to the forensic center in Anchorage. As the remains were loaded onto the aircraft, the entire search team stood in silence. No one needed to speak to understand that the case of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale had finally crossed the threshold of a deadlock that had persisted for over a decade. The remains of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale were transported to the Anchorage Forensic Center that same night, and analysis was fast-tracked due to the case having remained open for over 13 years and the existence of a suspect who had confessed to leading the victims away from their vehicle. The forensic team began by reassembling all collected bone fragments, cleaning them, using standard procedures to accurately assess every mark. During skeletal reconstruction, the experts quickly identified a critical feature: both sets of remains exhibited multiple fractures consistent with a high-impact fall. Emily's femur and tibia showed spiral compression fractures, a pattern characteristic of a free fall onto a hard surface. Her skull displayed a long fissure running from the frontal bone down to the temporal region, indicating a powerful impact against rock or hard ice. Ryan's remains showed similar trauma: bilateral rib fractures, shattered shoulder blades, and a collapsed pelvis, all consistent with a body plunging into a deep crevasse or being pushed off a rocky edge under uncontrolled conditions. The matching injury patterns between the 2 victims led the forensic experts to an initial conclusion: both died from multiple traumatic injuries caused by a severe fall, with no evidence suggesting they were attacked with a weapon prior to the fall. To rule out gunshot wounds, the team meticulously examined all major bone surfaces for entry-exit holes, beveling, or distinctive fracturing patterns caused by bullets. After inspecting all large skeletal structures, no features consistent with gunshot trauma were found. This confirmed that the .44 Magnum recovered from Caleb's cabin was not used in the victims' deaths, though it remained significant as evidence demonstrating Caleb's possession of a powerful firearm and his deliberate concealment of it. The next phase involved DNA testing. Hair samples recovered from the Bronco's cargo area were compared with DNA extracted from the bones of Emily and Ryan. When the results came back, the DNA sequence from the long hair strand matched Emily's DNA profile completely, confirming that a victim's hair had been present in Caleb's Bronco, a first direct piece of evidence linking the victims to the suspect's vehicle. The two shorter hairs found on the rear seat base shared the same mitochondrial DNA haplogroup as Ryan Hale. Although too short for nuclear DNA analysis, they were still classified as highly likely to belong to the victim under Alaska forensic standards. Additionally, the forensic team analyzed fabric fragments recovered from the victims and compared them to items in Caleb's cabin. A fiber from Emily's jacket was found adhering to the weave of a wool scarf discovered in the cabin. The fiber was compared using infrared spectroscopy and longitudinal fiber microscopy, yielding the conclusion that the fabric fragment and the scarf had been in direct contact shortly before the victims' deaths. This finding carried strong legal weight, as the scarf was found in Caleb's cabin, while the fabric belonged to a victim discovered in the crevasse. It established a direct physical link between the cabin, Bronco, and the victims' bodies. Furthermore, the team conducted isotopic analysis of ice and sediment adhering to the bones to determine the time of deposition into the crevasse. The sediment layers on the bones matched the geological conditions of the Sheridan Glacier area during the winter of 2006, with no intervening layers from subsequent years. Combined with analysis of remaining soft tissue decomposition and natural ice formation, the forensic team concluded that the time of death fell on the evening of December 22, 2006. Perfectly consistent with the victim's disappearance and the gas station timeline established early in the investigation. To ensure accuracy, the team also analyzed soil, mineral, and ice samples adhering to non-fully decomposed fabric pieces. The results confirmed they matched the exact geological profile of the crevasse area, ruling out the possibility that the bodies had been moved from multiple locations. The state of tissue decomposition, degree of mineralization, and ice structure all indicated the bodies had remained fixed in the crevasse for over 13 years. Moreover, skeletal examination revealed no strong defensive injuries, resistance fractures, or pre-mortem bruising. This led the forensic team to conclude that the victims were not directly assaulted before falling into the crevasse, but were likely lured, threatened, or led away in a state of confusion before falling or being pushed into the deep area. Consistent with Caleb's indirect statements during interrogation, the final forensic report was compiled into a nearly 60-page document, fully concluding that the cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries from a fall from height. There was no evidence of shooting. DNA from hair and fabric directly linked the victims to Caleb's cabin and Bronco, and the time of death aligned with the evening of December 22, 2006. This represented the strongest forensic conclusion since the case began, for the first time forming a seamless chain of evidence connecting Caleb's cabin, the vehicle, the area of disappearance, and the location where the bodies were found. Based on the forensic evidence chain, GIS data, the 2019 silhouette photographs, and Caleb's indirect admissions, the investigative team reconstructed the events of the night of December 22, 2006, in a continuous logical sequence to determine the chain of events that led to the deaths of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale. When all data were cross-referenced, the reconstruction model showed that Caleb followed the victim's Jeep shortly after they left Fisherman's Store gas station around 2042. GIS simulation indicated Caleb's Bronco most likely departed from his cabin between 2046, traveled along a trail leading to Copper River Highway, and joined the main road before the Jeep reached the Aurora viewing spot. This matched actual distances and the Bronco's average travel speed under strong winds and heavy snowfall. When the Jeep stopped at a favorable vantage point to observe the sky, Caleb parked his Bronco close behind, exactly matching the position captured in the silhouette photograph from the second Nikon camera. This stopping point was not far from a side trail that Caleb frequently used for night hunting and was circled on the map recovered from his cabin. While the two victims were exiting the vehicle or preparing photography equipment, Caleb approached them. Although he did not provide full details during interrogation, indirect evidence suggested the initial contact was not immediately aggressive, no strong signs of struggle on clothing, no fractured wrists or hand bones, features typically present in cases of fierce resistance. It is highly likely that Caleb used the excuse of the road is about to close due to the storm, or there's a safer shelter nearby to persuade them to leave the Jeep. This aligns with his admitted statement. I just wanted them to get off the road. Forensic evidence showed they followed Caleb a short distance toward the trail leading into the Sheridan Glacier Valley, an area of steep, unstable terrain during a blizzard, consistent with the location where the bodies were found. However, the fracture patterns and body positioning indicated a struggle or collision near the edge of the crevasse. The spiral leg fractures, skull fissures, and shattered shoulders of Emily and Ryan showed they did not fall straight down, but plunged in an uncontrolled state, most likely due to being pushed or attempting to regain balance while under pressure or threat. This logic aligns with the forensic conclusion. No gunshot injuries, no cuts or stabs, but clear signs of severe loss of balance before the fall. Analysis of the fall position determined they plunged into a natural crevasse more than 6 meters deep, where ice and rock preserved the bodies for many years. Since the two bodies were found about 1.2 meters apart within the cavity, it is highly likely they did not fall at the exact same moment. One may have slipped first, while the second attempted to retreat or flee, and was either pulled along or fell immediately after. Examination of fabric fibers adhering to the wool scarf showed that at least one victim had been very close to Caleb, shortly before the fall, proving physical interaction in the final moments. After the two fell into the crevasse, Caleb left the scene. There were no signs of dragging bodies, no evidence of movement after the fall, indicating Caleb did not descend or attempt to verify their condition. Instead, he returned to his Bronco, drove back to his cabin, and reported the incident to no one. The fact that he hid Emily's wool scarf in his cabin shows direct prior contact between him and the victim before the fall. Hair samples in the Bronco's cargo area prove the victims had been near or inside his vehicle. This inference aligns with Caleb's incomplete statements during interrogation. He did not deny leading them away, but avoided describing the moment they fell, a sign of a situation that spiraled out of control or was not fully planned from the start. Thereafter, Caleb remained silent for over 13 years, making no report, seeking no help, and providing no information that could have aided the search. His marking of multiple locations on maps indicates he had returned to the area at some point or monitored SAR efforts in 2006. From the entire data chain, the most logical sequence is Caleb followed the Jeep for an as-yet unclear personal motive, approached the victims while they were photographing, led them away from the vehicle using a storm-related pretext, brought them to the area near the crevasse edge. Struggle or panicked reaction occurred. Both fell into the crevasse and died immediately or shortly thereafter. Caleb left the scene and concealed the entire truth until his arrest in 2019. This reconstructed sequence became the basis for linking all evidence into a complete logical chain for the prosecution file. Immediately after completing the full reconstruction of the case events and receiving all forensic results, confirming the cause of death, DNA connections, and logical event sequence, the prosecution team from the Valdez Cordova District Attorney's Office began the formal process of preparing the indictment against Caleb Monroe, based on the appropriate criminal statutes under Alaska law. The first meeting between investigators and prosecutors took place in a secure conference room in Anchorage, where all physical evidence, wool scarf, hair samples, adhered fabric, crevasse-marked map, 2019 silhouette photographs, and GIS data was presented in chronological order. The lead prosecutor opened the meeting by determining that the most serious charge must accurately reflect the case sequence. Caleb had led two victims from a safe location, taken them into hazardous terrain under extreme weather conditions, and this conduct directly resulted in their deaths. Under Alaska law, this conduct constitutes kidnapping resulting in death, especially aggravated felony carrying a penalty range of 30 years to life imprisonment without parole. Because there were two victims, the charge was established as two separate counts, each corresponding to the death of one person, Emily Hart and Ryan Hale. The prosecution argued that Caleb used threat or deception to cause the victims to leave the Jeep and led them to a remote area they would not have gone to voluntarily, fitting the definition of restraining another person by deception or intimidation. The fall into the crevasse did not need to be a direct intentional push. It was sufficient to prove Caleb knowingly brought them to a place where fatal consequences were foreseeable, thereby satisfying kidnapping, resulting in death under AS 11.4.1.300T. After agreeing on the primary charge, the prosecution turned to the second charge, evidence tampering. Evidence included Caleb concealing Emily's scarf in the cabin, keeping a map marking the crevasse location, hiding the Bronco containing victim hair, and failing to report information for many years despite his actions causing the deaths. The prosecution determined that hiding the scarf and removing traces from the scene constituted intentional alteration, movement, or concealment of evidence related to a criminal offense. Additionally, Emily's hair found in the Bronco's rear cargo area directly showed that Caleb had once had a victim or victim's belongings in the vehicle, yet he claimed the vehicle wasn't running and never had contact with anyone. This reinforced the evidence tampering charge and demonstrated Caleb's deliberate creation of misleading statements to obstruct the investigation. The third charge was abuse of a corpse, applied when a person intentionally conceals, moves, or fails to report a body in a manner that hinders search and investigation. In this case, although Caleb did not handle the bodies in the traditional sense, his act of leaving two bodies in the crevasse, failing to notify police, and intentionally allowing them to be completely entombed by ice and snow for over 13 years was deemed intentional concealment of the bodies. The prosecution argued that Caleb knew the consequences yet deliberately withheld information, satisfying as 11.6.1.130 on abuse of corpse. The prolonged conduct spanning over a decade was considered an aggravating factor, especially given the victims' families' continuous fruitless search efforts. The fourth charge was hindering prosecution, hindering investigation, reflecting Caleb's intentional provision of false or misleading information over many years. In 2006, he stated the Bronco wasn't running, the cabin had no visitors, and he was home all evening. In 2015, during a second interview, Caleb continued adjusting his account in a more vague direction to avoid GIS simulation cross-checks, including changing his cabin timeline and tire condition claims. His silence regarding the body's location, despite knowing the victims' families and SAR teams had searched dangerously for years, was viewed by the prosecution as deliberate obstruction of justice. These charges were organized by the prosecution team into the formal charging structure: 1. Kidnapping, resulting in death. Emily Hart, 2. Kidnapping, resulting in death. Ryan Hale, 3. Tampering with physical evidence. 4. Abuse of corpse. 5. Hindering prosecution in the first degree, under Alaska law. The 2 counts of kidnapping resulting in death are the highest level charges and form the cornerstone of the entire prosecution file. The prosecution prepared the case file for court submission with the argument that Emily and Ryan's deaths were not merely an accident, they were the direct result of Caleb's actions of restraint, removal, and abandonment. Moreover, the physical evidence chain formed a tight connection, victim hair in the Bronco scarf in the cabin map, precisely marking the death locale silhouette, consistent with Caleb's body structure, indirect admission of leading them away. Combined with GIS data simulating the Bronco's presence at the exact time of disappearance and forensic conclusions confirming the time of death on the evening of 12:20 seconds. The prosecution possessed the strongest and most cohesive body of evidence since the case began in 2006. The indictment package was finalized, signed, and prepared for submission to the district court, opening the formal criminal prosecution phase against Caleb Monroe. The trial of Caleb Monroe opened in late 2019 at the Valdez Cordova Borough Court, with a jury present the Alaska State Prosecutor, and the defense team hired by Caleb after his indictment. The prosecution began by presenting a tightly connected chain of core evidence, emphasizing that all the pieces were arranged in a unified logical sequence, each part reinforcing the others, and that there was no reasonable innocent explanation for their combination. The first piece the prosecution placed before the jury was the 2019 recovered silhouette photograph from the Nikon camera that had drifted under the Iac River, along with photogrammetry and AI analysis. The original image was enlarged, then displayed alongside a body proportion analysis showing an 87% match with Caleb's physical specifications from DMV records. The prosecution explained the measurement of angles, relative height, shoulder structure, and body tilt, all of which matched Caleb's physique, and completely ruled out the possibility that the silhouette belonged to anyone else in the area. The defense objected, arguing that the image was blurry and could not be used for identification, but the summoned forensic expert testified in court that the degree of match exceeded the legal standard threshold for non-direct identification, especially given that the photograph's timestamp aligned precisely with the victim's disappearance. The second piece was DNA from hairs recovered inside the Bronco's trunk and under the rear seat. The analysis results were presented through gene cluster comparison charts, proving that the long hair strand fully matched Emily Hart's DNA. The shorter hair sample, although only mitochondrial DNA was analyzed, showed a high match with Ryan's DNA. The prosecution emphasized the hair of both victims could not have naturally appeared inside Caleb Monroe's vehicle unless they had been there. The defense attempted to argue that the hairs could have transferred from clothing and fallen into the vehicle at an earlier time, but the prosecution countered by displaying Caleb's and the victim's movement maps from 2006, clearly showing they had never met or crossed paths prior to the disappearance. The third piece of evidence the prosecution introduced was the marked-up topographic map found in Caleb's cabin. When the map was placed before the jury, the prosecution asked a terrain expert to compare the pencil-circled locations with the coordinates where the bodies were eventually recovered. All matched within a radius of under 40 meters, an accuracy level that could not occur by chance. The prosecution pointed out that Caleb had not only marked that specific area, but had also circled at least 3 other ravines along his regular travel routes, demonstrating deep knowledge of the terrain and the deliberate selection of difficult-to-access locations to conceal the bodies. The next key piece was Caleb's own statements. The prosecution played audio recordings of the interrogation in which Caleb admitted to having led them away from the Jeep and confirmed that's the place they were there, while pointing at the location on the map. The defense immediately objected, claiming the statements were coerced. However, the prosecution replayed the opening portion of the interrogation, clearly documenting that Caleb had been read his rights, understood them, and voluntarily answered questions throughout. There was no pressure or threat, and Caleb never requested an attorney before making the admissions. The following section presented by the prosecution was the Bronco tire tread data. A tire tread analysis expert was called to describe the match between the tread pattern found at the 2006 scene and the off-road tire type consistent with a 1992-1995 Bronco, the exact model Caleb owned. When the prosecution displayed the 2006 crime scene sketch alongside the reconstructed tread model, the jury could clearly see that the direction of the unknown vehicle's stop aligned precisely with the position of the silhouette in the photograph. The defense tried to argue that hundreds of Broncos could have used similar tires, but the prosecution rebutted with DMV data showing only 28 Broncos registered in the entire Cordova area at that time, and only Caleb resided in the exact area where the trail led to the disappearance location. Finally, the prosecution presented the most logically decisive piece, the 2014 GIS simulation. A data analysis expert testified in court about the reconstruction of the Jeeps and Broncos paths based on NOAA weather data, snow depth, road incline, and departure time from the gas station. When the model was projected on the large screen, the jury clearly saw the Bronco appearing simultaneously with the Jeep between 2055-2057, the exact time Emily took the silhouette photograph. The GIS analysis also proved that Caleb's cabin sat on the only route that would have allowed the Bronco to reach the area at precisely that moment. The prosecution concluded its presentation. We have an image of the suspect at the crime scene, victim's DNA inside the suspect's vehicle, a map marked by the suspect accurately indicating the death location, an admission of leading the victims away, and data modeling confirming the Bronco's presence at the exact time of the disappearance. No innocent interpretation can reconcile all of these facts. At the end of the presentation, the jury was asked to consider each piece of evidence as a link in a continuous chain of events. As their eyes moved from the map to the DNA, from the tread to the silhouette, the entire prosecution structure became unmistakable. The case had been completely assembled, with no room for reasonable doubt. After 3 weeks of trial, more than 20 witnesses, 4 forensic experts, and hundreds of pages of documents presented, the jury retired to deliberate in closed session. They reviewed every piece of evidence, from the 87% matching silhouette, victim's hair DNA in the Bronco, the marked ravine map, Caleb's self-incriminating statements, the GIS simulation confirming the Bronco's appearance at the precise time of disappearance, to the tire tread data and forensic conclusions about the cause of death. After more than 10 hours of discussion, the jury returned to the courtroom and delivered the verdict guilty on all counts, including kidnapping resulting in death for Emily Hart, kidnapping resulting in death for Ryan Hale, evidence tampering, abuse of corpse, and hindering prosecution in the first degree. When the verdict was read, Caleb Monroe maintained the blank expression he had worn throughout the trial, though his eyes flickered slightly when the 2 most serious charges, each carrying extremely severe penalties under Alaska law, were announced. At the sentencing hearing, the judge emphasized that this was one of the longest-running unresolved cases in the borough, spanning more than 13 years, and that concealing the bodies in ice and snow had forced the victims' families to endure unspeakable pain throughout that time. He also pointed out that Caleb not only made no attempt to render aid or report the incident, but deliberately hid the wool scarf, remained silent through dozens of indirect sour interviews, and left the 2 bodies in the ravine as a means of erasing evidence. This conduct, the judge stated, not only took the lives of 2 young people but inflicted prolonged suffering on their families, the Cordova community, and the entire investigative process. After considering the aggravating factors, including the number of victims, the extended period of body concealment, efforts to mislead the investigation, and the inherent dangerousness of the initial act, the judge imposed the maximum sentence for each count. For kidnapping resulting in death of Emily Hart, the judge sentenced 99 years without parole. For kidnapping resulting in death of Ryan Hale, the judge imposed an additional 99 years to be served consecutively, not concurrently. The remaining charges, evidence tampering, abuse of corpse, and hindering prosecution, received additional penalties but were merged into the 2 primary sentences, as the 198-year total already far exceeded any realistic human lifespan. The official total sentence, 198 years, in a maximum security Alaska State Correctional Facility, with no possibility of parole, no early release consideration, and no eligibility for any special commutation programs. Caleb Monroe was escorted out by judicial marshals after sentencing, handcuffed and in leg irons, and placed directly into the prisoner transport vehicle. He did not look back at the courtroom and spoke no final words. As the vehicle door closed, the judge declared the proceedings concluded, affirming that the case of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale, after more than 13 years buried in Alaska's ice and snow, had finally received a just and permanent verdict, ending the perpetrator's freedom. Following the sentencing hearing and Caleb Monroe's formal transfer to maximum security custody, Detective Laura Jensen began the final step of an investigative journey that had lasted nearly 6 years for her personally and 13 years for the entire Alaska State Troopers force, completing the final report to close the cold case file. In the small office at the Anchorage Evidence Center, Laura gathered all materials from the case reopening in 2014 through the conclusion of proceedings in 2019, organizing them in standard chronological order. GIS reports, AI silhouette analysis, forensic results, interrogation recordings, crime scene photos, cabin and Bronco search records, and all court decisions. She wrote the summary section, noting that the disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale, which initially had no leads, no witnesses, and no clear physical evidence, had been solved through modern forensic technology, persistent review of early oversights, and a continuous chain of evidence leading to the sole suspect. The case resolution status field was updated by Laura with a single line that for many years, no one at Alaska State Troopers had been able to write for this case. Cold case. Solved. The bolded line appeared at the top of the comprehensive report, officially marking the end of one of the state's most intractable files. She then completed the executive summary, recounting the timeline stage by stage: initial case opening in 2006, designation as cold case in 2007, 6 years of periodic review with no progress, reopening in 2014, discovery of timeline discrepancies and tread evidence, 2014 GIS analysis, 2015 interview of Caleb, 2016-2018 stagnation period, 2019 Nikon camera recovery, silhouette photo restoration, AI analysis, search warrant issuance, suspect arrest, statement confirming body location, recovery of remains, forensic analysis, and finally, the conviction trial. Each step was documented clearly, forming a model cold case investigation template for future training. Upon completing the 200-page report, Laura signed the final page as lead investigator, then transferred the file to the Anchorage Evidence Center's long-term storage division. All related physical evidence, including the wool scarf, DNA samples, marked map, GIS analysis models, and original Nikon memory card, was sealed according to long-term preservation standards and placed in a specialized low-temperature, strictly humidity-controlled vault. The archive log recorded the completion date December 18, 2019, exactly 13 years since Emily and Ryan were last seen. After sealing the boxes and signing the storage inventory, Laura Jensen paused for a few seconds in front of the evidence shelves, looking at the cold case, solved label on the file as a profoundly complete ending to a long journey. She closed the storage cabinet, locked it, and made the final electronic system entry. When the evidence vault door shut, the Emily Hart and Ryan Hale case was officially recorded as resolved, becoming one of the rare Alaska cold cases ever solved after more than a decade buried in ice and silence. The story of the 2006 Alaska cold case, solved after 13 years through persistent investigation, technological advancement, and an unwavering refusal to give up, reflects many issues still present in contemporary American society. The disappearance of Emily Hart and Ryan Hale in extreme weather conditions, with no witnesses and almost no trace left behind, demonstrates that even in a nation with a strong citizen protection system like the United States, personal safety still heavily depends on individual vigilance, preparation, and survival skills. The chain of breakthroughs that crack the case, from the chance discovery of the Nikon camera under the river to AI silhouette analysis and GIS modeling, reminds us that even the smallest piece of data or seemingly insignificant action can sometimes prove vital to life and death. It also serves as a warning to communities about the importance of preserving information, technology, and cooperation with law enforcement, even when an incident appears unrelated to oneself. Another crucial lesson comes from Detective Laura Jensen's persistence. She refused to accept vague statements, never overlooked discrepancies of even a few minutes in the timeline or a few meters in tire track positioning. This reflects a very American value: perseverance, accountability, and refusal to settle for half measures. In modern American life, where pressure, speed, and overwhelming information volumes can cause people to give up, this story reminds us that sometimes a single re-examination of data, one question of why doesn't this detail fit, or a little extra patience can completely change the outcome, not just in investigations, but in work, relationships, personal safety, and future decisions. Finally, the fact that the Cordova community had to wait more than 13 years to learn the truth reminds us that the pain of victims' families always lingers behind the statistics. When we care about one another, notice anomalies in our surroundings, or promptly report suspicious activity to authorities, we not only protect ourselves but also contribute to protecting the community, true to the spirit of civic duty that the United States has always emphasized. Thank you for following this more than 13-year journey to solve the case. If you'd like to continue joining us for in-depth investigative stories like this, please subscribe so you don't miss new content. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring mysteries buried by time across America.